Welcome back to Dark Sleep Radio. I'm Garrett, and today I've got a story that'll take you right to the edge of Area 51. Most people know that military base is strictly off-limits, no exceptions. But during the annual Rachel Nevada Festival, things get a bit interesting. Crowds gather, conspiracy theorists mix with tourists, and the usual tight security gets slightly distracted. That weekend, I drove out alone in my old pickup with my dog Jasper riding beside me. I'm not some adrenaline junkie. I just enjoy exploring old military sites and hearing their hidden stories. The desert was cold and dry, with a thin haze softening the horizon and floodlights blinking in the distance. About half a mile from the fence, I parked near some scrub brush and decided to walk closer. Jasper followed, ears alert, but not scared. The ground was dusty, and an eerie silence grew heavier with each step. I expected the usual fences, watchtowers, standard military stuff. But when I rounded a small rise, something completely unexpected caught my eye. On the tarmac, under bright floodlights, sat an object unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was dark, so dark it seemed to absorb the light around it. Incredibly smooth, with no seams or markings. Not a plane, not a drone, not even a helicopter. Its shape was bizarre, somewhere between a flattened disc and a kite. No wings, no propellers, no visible engines or exhaust. Just this silent, strange form sitting low against the ground. My heart raced. Carefully, I pulled out my phone to record, moving slowly to avoid drawing attention. The area was deserted, but something felt off. The silence was too complete, too deliberate. Floodlights buzzed overhead, throwing harsh shadows across the cracked asphalt. My heart was racing as I framed something in my phone screen. Then, in an instant, it vanished. No sound, no sparks, no dramatic exit, just gone. I dropped my phone, stunned. Jasper beside me went rigid, a low growl rumbling from his throat as he stared into the darkness where the object had been moments before. A quick scan revealed nothing. No vehicles, no guards, no helicopters. Just empty tarmac, bathed in harsh light and an unsettling silence. When I retrieved my phone and checked the video later, everything was corrupted. Static and glitches covered most of the file, as if someone had deliberately scrambled the footage. Only a single frame remained, a faint silhouette standing exactly where the object had disappeared. The shape was indistinct, more like a sideways shadow than a clear form. I studied that frame obsessively, zooming, brightening, applying filters. Nothing helped. The image seemed to resist my attempts to understand it, almost daring me to forget what I thought I'd seen. The next day, I kept my distance from the fence. Jasper was restless, ears twitching at every slight sound, tail stiff with tension. Around town, the festival continued, full of noise and celebration. But out here in the desert, everything felt different, quieter, as if the landscape had swallowed all sound. That night, I slept in the truck's cab, radio crackling with static and occasional military transmissions. Part of me wanted to return, to investigate further, but something held me back. A sense of being watched, not threateningly, but expectantly, like the desert itself was waiting. I've shared this story with few people. Who would believe me? Yet every time I look at that corrupted footage, that single blurred frame, I can't help wondering how close I came to witnessing something never meant to be seen, and whether it's still out there, watching and waiting. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown. Parima Tower 3 was my post, overlooking the Groom Lake scrub edge. A slim moon hung in the sky. The desert night pressed down, heavy and charged with an electric tension. Orion sat beside me in the cab, his ears twitching, head swiveling as if sensing something I couldn't. I methodically worked through my routine checks. Fence lights on, motion sensors green, radio tuned to channel 4. Midnight arrived, and the base's exterior floodlights clicked off standard protocol. But this time, the radio died, too. Static beeped briefly, then pure silence. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume, but no communications came through. Usually, I'd hear chatter from the control shack or roving patrols, but tonight, an unnatural quiet blanketed everything. Orion whined softly, thumping his tail once. I switched my flashlight to high beam and swept it across the fence line. Nothing moved. "Base, this is Tower 3. Come in," I called out. Only the wind's rattle against the chain link answered me. Grabbing my sidearm and pocket knife, I clipped the radio mic to my vest and slid down the tower ladder. Orion followed, pausing on the gravel. Emergency fence lights glowed red along the perimeter, but the compound's floodlights remained dark. A distant generator's faint hum was the only sound. At the gate, the keypad showed no response. My key card failed twice. I radioed again, silence echoed back. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked up at me with a quizzical tilt of his head. Suddenly, warning sirens wailed briefly inside the base, then cut off abruptly. Across other towers, gates slammed shut with metallic clanks that vibrated through the ground. I decided to walk the fence line, flashlight cutting through the darkness, Orion at my side. My boots crunched on desert gravel. Each flashlight sweep caught razor wire, glinting overhead. Orion's tail remained stiff, his gaze constantly drawn to the darkness beyond the fence. 10 minutes into my walk, shapes emerged. At first they looked like rocks or equipment, but something felt wrong. 10 yards outside the fence, a row of tall white figures stood motionless. They were utterly featureless, no clothing, no faces, no recognizable limbs, just smooth, white silhouettes, like mannequins carved from pure light. My heart stopped. Orion nudged my leg with a soft whine. I had just witnessed something impossible. Standing motionless in a perfect line, those figures had absorbed my flashlight beam, glowing from within like strange apparitions against the fence. My dog's hackles were raised, his low growl breaking the eerie silence. The air carried a metallic scent, reminiscent of rust and old batteries. When I tried to call out, only my own echo answered. As I reached for the gate latch, a cold breeze spun around me, rattling the fence. Then it happened. The figures flickered 3 times and dissolved into the desert haze, leaving nothing behind except Orion's heavy breathing. Frozen in place, I clicked off my torch and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. The radios were dead, emitting only static when I switched channels. I climbed back into the tower cabin, slamming and locking the door behind me. Orion jumped onto the seat, staring at me with wide, alert eyes. The compound's floodlights clicked back on slowly, deliberately. Generators hummed to life. I tried my cell phone, but found no signal, just a low battery warning. Outside the window, the desert stretched empty and silent. The night crawled by in fitful, disturbed dozes. Phantom footsteps crunched on gravel. Orion would bark once, and I'd grab my flashlight, finding nothing. Dust twisters danced in the wind, and my radio continued to spit static. At 5:45 a.m., everything changed. The comm center's text arrived. Lockdown lifted. Resume normal operation. Floodlights dimmed to standard brightness. Gates unlocked with a distant thud. Voices crackled back over the radio, half awake and normal. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Orion stretched and jumped down. Climbing the tower ladder, with wind shaking the rails, I watched the desert sun begin to burn away the night's strange memories. I was running systems checks in the command center, with Raj on comms and Shadow curled under my desk. The base was quiet that night, around 9:15 p.m. during our quarterly integration test. Normally, screens would flicker with data streams and graph spikes, but at 9:18, everything changed. The main monitors suddenly filled with rows of jagged symbols, not letters or numbers, but strange rune-like shapes stitched together, shifting slowly across the screen. I leaned forward, rubbing my eyes. Shadow stirred and gave a low whine. Raj's voice crackled through the headset. "You seeing this, Carlos?" I tried pulling up the backup feed. Same symbols. Then a soft melody began playing behind the static. Later, I patrolled the perimeter. The gravel below showed no signs of disturbance, no footprints, no tire tracks. The fence revealed nothing. No scratch marks, no evidence of any breach. When I returned to the security office, my supervisor seemed tired. He handed me the daily log. "Nothing reported," he said. "No fence breaches, no sensor triggers." He tapped my report. The lockdown was just a precaution, a radio glitch that went face wide. The Tower 3 logs marked everything as operator error. No mention of the strange figures or the chill I'd felt. That day, I drove home on Route 375 with Orion riding shotgun, his head out the window, in Rachel. I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. "We just saw the lights go out. Never heard sirens." At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet, the wind-rustled scrub brush on the distant hill where I'd seen them. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge. The sun warmed my neck, and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and returned to my routine. But every shift, I find myself looking toward those floodlights, wondering if the white, featureless figures will step out of the darkness again, standing silently as the world continues around them. The servers hummed with a static-filled music box tone. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Shadow lifted his head, ears alert, tilting sideways. The eerie, simple notes looped, ding, 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 then dissolved into white noise. I radioed control. "We have an anomaly," I said. The Bascom crackled back with silence. The melodies swelled and vanished in an instant. My fingers hit restart on the console. Screens blinked black, then reignited with our standard interface of logs, graphs, and data streams. "What was that?" Raj muttered. I checked the clock. 9:19 p.m. Something felt off. The system uptime log revealed a troubling detail. The network had gone completely dark for exactly 47 seconds. No downtime entry. Just blank space. Server room cameras had gone dark. Security footage showed nothing but darkness, then sudden light. When we tried retrieving logs, something was missing. A single cryptic line remained. 4. Melody not found. Raj's whispered question hung in the air. Who programs an error message like that? Shadow prowled under the desk, sniffing cables as if expecting to find something hidden. Reports started trickling in. Hangar B's lights dimmed. HVAC systems briefly pushed cold air into control rooms. Crew members complained of a strange ringing, like a tuning fork vibrating inside their skulls. I walked to the window overlooking Groom Lake. The dry lake bed stretched dark and empty. Distant hangar silhouettes barely visible. No movement. No sound. The usual generator drone and patrol vehicles were conspicuously absent. The server room looked normal. Racks hummed steadily. No alarms. The air carried the warm scent of circuit boards. I flipped lights on and off. Everything appeared green, but those logs still showed that mysterious 47-second gap. That night, Shadow guarded my door persistently. Soft tapping outside caught my attention, like footsteps on gravel. I stood, flashlight in hand, and threw open the door. Nothing. Empty corridor. Normal lights. No trace of movement. Returning to bed, I noticed the bedside clock had jumped ahead 10 minutes. A trick of my imagination. I wasn't so sure. I clocked in at 11:45 p.m., just before the midnight lockdown. My shift was at Perimeter Tower 3, positioned by the west fence overlooking the Groom Lake scrub edge. A slim moon hung overhead. Something felt off from the start. A strange melody first caught my attention. Ding, 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 ding. I tried to shake it from my mind, staring blankly at the ceiling. In the days that followed, people made jokes about the bass symphony, but no one wanted to discuss it seriously. Official reports labeled the incident as power fluctuation, or electromagnetic interference. Raj and I shared a sense of being watched whenever we passed the server room door. Late at night, I could have sworn I heard that melody through my phone speaker, even when no apps were running. By Friday, maintenance had shut down the network to scrub systems. We worked by lantern light in the communications bay, reloading software and reconfiguring routers. Shadow, my dog, lay near the power supply, his ears twitching at each electronic beep. No more strange symbols appeared. The logs filled the 47-hour gap with interpolated data, creating smooth graphs with no sudden dips. That evening, under a half moon, I walked Shadow by the fence. Warm desert wind brushed against my skin. Tire tracks from earlier test rigs marked the ground beneath the barbed wire. I knelt to inspect some scuff marks in the dirt. Nothing seemed unusual. As we turned to head home, my radio crackled softly. The first hint of static, then the melody's opening note. Ding. My pulse raced. I hit the power button, but the radio died. Suddenly, my phone glowed to life on its own, displaying an error screen. Melody not found, it seemed to whisper. I dropped both devices, calling to Shadow. The sound cut off. The desert went silent. The phone screen went dark. I scooped up Shadow and jogged back to the gate. Inside the quarters, lights flickered as I crossed the threshold. My phone lay on the table, locked, with nothing on the display. Facing the wall, I stared at the blank space, convinced I could still hear the faintest chime. Later, I discovered the official incident report, archived under Network Anomaly. No mention of music, symbols, or missing time. Just a brief footnote. System restored 03120 to 20 hours. Cause undetermined. That night, I took Shadow home and left my phone in the car. As I lay in bed, Shadow curled beside me, his ears twitching. In the darkness, I listened intently, waiting for the bass's hum, the server's whisper, or the faint echo of those mysterious notes slipping through the walls. The night was heavy, air thick, with static waiting to break. I ran through my standard checks. Fence lights, on, motion sensors, green, radio tuned to channel 4. Leaning against the railing, I peered through my binoculars at the empty desert landscape. Orion sat in the truck cab, ears alert and head swiveling like he sensed something wasn't right. When midnight struck, the base's exterior floodlights dimmed, standard protocol. But this time, the radio went completely silent. Static beeped briefly, then nothing. I tapped the handset, twisted the volume knob. No communications. Typically, I'd hear chatter from the control shack, shift supervisor, and roving patrols. Tonight, it was as if every radio had been mysteriously muted. Orion whined softly and thumped his tail once. I clicked my flashlight to high beam and swept it across the fence line. Silence greeted me. "Base, this is Tower 3. Come in," I called out. Only wind rattling the chain link answered. I grabbed my sidearm and pocket knife, clipped the radio mic to my vest, and ascended the tower ladder. Orion followed, pausing momentarily on the gravel. Emergency fence post lights glowed red, marking the perimeter. Distant generators hummed faintly, but the compound's floodlights remained dark. At the gate, the keypad showed no response. My keycard yielded nothing, still locked. My voice echoed in the growing gloom. Orion paced, nose to the ground, then looked up at me, head tilted. Suddenly, warning sirens wailed briefly inside the base, before falling silent, as if someone had cut their power. Other tower gates slammed shut in rapid succession. Clank, 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 their echo vibrating through the ground beneath my boots. I decided to walk alongside the fence, flashlight and Orion leading our way. My boots crunched on desert gravel, and each torch flick caught a glint of razor wire overhead. Orion's tail remained stiff, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond the fence. After 10 minutes of careful walking, shapes emerged in the distance. Initially, I mistook them for rocks or crashed equipment, but something felt off. 10 yards outside the fence, a row of tall, white figures stood motionless. They were completely featureless. No clothing folds, no faces, no limbs in their expected places. Just smooth white silhouettes, like mannequins carved from pure light. My heart raced. Orion's low growl drew my attention. A line of figures stood motionless by the fence, unnaturally absorbing my flashlight's beam like they glowed from within. No movement, no blinking, just perfect stillness. The metallic air felt thick with tension. I backed toward the gate, keeping the light trained on them. "Hey, who's that?" The radio spat nothing but static across every channel. A cold breeze whirled around, rattling the fence. Then they flickered. 1, 2, 3 times, wavering like heat mirages before dissolving completely into the desert haze. Only the fence and Orion's heavy breathing remained. I stood frozen, my flashlight cutting through empty space. Back in the tower cabin, I slammed and locked the door. Orion jumped onto the seat, wide-eyed. The radios were dead. No communications anywhere. Suddenly, the floodlights clicked on, slow, deliberate, with generators humming back to life. My cell phone showed no signal, just a low battery warning. Outside the window, the desert stretched empty and silent. The rest of the night passed in fragmented, restless moments. Phantom footsteps on gravel. Orion barking. Static-filled radio. Dust twisters spinning in the wind. At 5:45 a.m., everything shifted. The comm center's text arrived. Lockdown lifted. Normal operations resumed. Floodlights dimmed. Gates unlocked with a distant thud. Radio voices crackled back to life, half awake. I exhaled, suddenly aware I'd been holding my breath. Orion stretched and jumped down. Climbing the tower ladder, I felt a wind shake the rails. The desert sun began burning away the night's strange gloom. On the gravel below, something waited. The night felt normal until the glitches started. 20 minutes into my crosswind pattern, the gauges on my panel flickered without warning. Altimeter, heading indicator, fuel flow meter, all went dark for a split second before snapping back like nothing happened. I was practicing touch and goes at the small strip outside Rachel, Nevada, with runway lights casting a pale glow behind me. No storm nearby, and the moon hidden behind a thin haze. I shrugged off the first anomaly as a bad circuit and gripped the yoke tighter, lining up for another landing. By the third circuit, something caught my eye, a shadow moving across the stars just above the northern horizon. At first, I thought a cloud had drifted by, but the sky was clear. Banking left, I tried to catch it through the side window. The shadow shifted too, sliding silently between constellations. Just a perfect black shape like someone had cut a piece out of the night. Later, back on the ground, I walked the perimeter. No footprints, no tire tracks. Even the dust was disturbed only by my own prints. I searched the fence for any sign, scratch marks, footprints, evidence of anything unusual. Nothing. In the security office, my supervisor seemed tired. He asked where I'd been, and I said I was on patrol. He nodded and handed me the daily log. No fence breaches, no sensor triggers. He tapped his pen on my report. Lockdown was just a precaution, a wired glitch. The radio had gone out base-wide. I glanced at Tower 3's hours log. Radio malfunction, sensor reset, operator error. No mention of figures. No mention of a strange chill. That day, I drove home on Route 375 beneath a bright blue sky. Orion rode shotgun, head out the window, tongue flying. In Rachel, I stopped for coffee and asked the clerk about the lockdown. He shrugged. We just saw the lights go out, never heard sirens. At home, I sat on the porch with Orion at my feet. Wind rustled scrub brush on the hill beyond our fence. I sipped coffee, staring at the ridge where I'd seen them. The sun warmed my neck, and my hands finally stopped shaking. I didn't file a service report. I left the logs as they were and went back to my usual routine. But every evening, when I clock in for my shift, I find myself glancing toward those floodlights, wondering if the figures will step out of the darkness again. White, featureless, standing silently as the world goes on around them. At 3,000 feet, everything went silent inside the cockpit. No radio chatter, no engine rumble, just the soft hiss of air flowing over the wings. A diamond-shaped shadow hovered, its edges razor-sharp and surface completely matte, backlit by starlight that blotted out every distant pinprick. My heart raced as I reached for the infrared scanner. The screen remained pitch black, showing no heat signature. I cycled through switches, watching the instruments on the dashboard go dark, one by one, as if an invisible hand was systematically shutting them off. The transponder and communication systems died, leaving me in an eerie silence. I cut the engine to idle and drifted, tracking the shadow's movement. It slipped upward, then tilted on its point and glided east. Attempting to follow, I released the yoke and grabbed the throttles, but the tachometer spat static and the engine sputtered. The familiar hum of the Lycoming vanished, replaced by an unsettling quiet. Sweat beaded on my palms as I wrestled with the controls. Reopening the throttle, I silently prayed for the engine to catch. Instead, every instrument blinked off again. I felt suspended, suddenly realizing the runway lights had disappeared. Rachel's glow was now just a faint smear on the desert floor below. Taking a deep breath, I switched off automatic systems and relied on pure instinct. Pushing the yoke forward to drop altitude, I watched the wingtip against the starfield. After what seemed like an eternity, the engine roared back to life. Gauges snapped on, radio crackled, and the mysterious diamond vanished. I circled twice, scanning the sky, but only jet contrails cutting through the Milky Way remained. Routine radio chatter from approaching Cessna filled the airwaves. Checking my heading, I realized I'd drifted far east over barren scrubland and dusty roads. No restricted area lights or patrol vehicles were visible. Back on the ground, I taxied to the tie-down and killed the engine. My legs felt unnaturally heavy as I climbed out, my headset crackling with static. The desert behind me stood silent and empty. Descending the boarding steps, I stood on the tarmac and gazed at the black sky. The strip's edge lights blinked, but no runway signals pointed toward that strange horizon. After locking the plane, I started walking toward the hangar. A barely there wind whispered around me, yet I detected a low, distant thrum beneath my boots, perhaps just my racing heartbeat echoing across the landscape. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw nothing moving. I was stretched out in the scrub brush behind my house, camera fixed on a tripod, when the first flicker caught my eye. My night sky shot would soon turn into something entirely unexpected. Days earlier, I'd been flying when something strange happened. My instruments went dark for 5 seconds, exactly when I spotted a perfect black diamond sliding between the stars. No one believed me. The mechanics at the hangar shrugged off my questions about power blips. Their circuit breaker panel looked clean, the lights steady. That night, I drove home across the empty highway, headlights cutting through desert darkness. A single weather alert buzzed on my phone, just a simple wind speed change. Nothing about electromagnetic weirdness. When I parked, I sat listening to crickets, glancing up through the windshield at stars with no diamond, no shadow. Mara and Milo greeted me inside. Our border collie pit mix bounded to the door, muddy paws skidding across tile. He looked at me differently, ears tilted, sensing something was off, but not barking. Mara handed me water. I sipped, tasting dust and leftover adrenaline. Later, I checked the navigation logs on my laptop. Every flight detail was recorded: altitude, heading, throttle, except for that 5-second gap when everything froze. The timestamp matched exactly when I saw the diamond. I pulled the logs into a spreadsheet, searching for anomalies. Nothing unusual appeared. No extra signals, no radar pings, no transponder codes. It was like my instruments momentarily glitched, and vanished from everyone else's radar. That night, I dreamed of flying again. Instruments dead, chasing a shape through starlit skies. I woke before dawn with Milo at my feet, his nose nudging my hand. For 2 days, I avoided flying. I buried myself in paperwork, ordered parts, checked oil samples, anything routine to feel normal. But every time I looked out the office window, that black diamond seemed to slip between stars. Soon, I'll have to log another flight. I'll run pre-flight checks, flip switches, warm up the engine. Mara will wave goodbye. Milo will race alongside the wheels as I climb into the cockpit. And I'll wonder, will my gauges stay alive this time? Will I catch that thing drifting smoothly through the night, blocking out everything I thought I understood? Out here near Rachel, Nevada, the desert was silent, save for the occasional tumbleweed brushing against the fence and my dog Orion softly snuffling beside me. I'd been passing time capturing long exposure shots of the Milky Way just after midnight. When I glanced at the camera's small LCD screen, something caught my eye. A faint, dimly glowing sphere hovered above the northern mesa. Initially, I dismissed it as a hot pixel or lens flare, common artifacts when shooting with a wide-open shutter. But zooming in revealed a soft, pale green circle with fuzzy edges. Reviewing the last dozen shots, I noticed the orb appeared in nearly the same spot across different star cluster frames. Checking the timestamps confirmed its recurring presence. 12:07, then 12 hours, 12 minutes, and 17 seconds, with the orb reappearing every 5 minutes. Orion suddenly sat up, ears twitching, and emitting a low growl behavior entirely unlike him. When I looked skyward, nothing was there. Just stars. I petted Orion, who whined and nudged my hand. Switching my phone to video mode and attaching the telescope lens adapter, I began recording. Around 2 minutes in, a green light flickered through the eyepiece, where the mesa rim met the sky, lingering briefly before vanishing. My watch's LED blinked at 72 BPM, and remarkably, the sphere's second pulse matched my exact heart rate. As my chest tightened, the sphere disappeared again. Orion suddenly bolted toward the fence, tail lowered. Following his gaze revealed nothing. The wind picked up cold air brushing my arms. I zipped my jacket, stopped the video, and packed my equipment. Walking back, Orion paused at the driveway's top, sniffing the air. A low, transformer-like hum hung in the background. Beyond the last streetlight, the road stretched pitch black. My flashlight beam cut through dusty air, revealing only desert brush and my own shadow. Later, reviewing the laptop footage, I watched stars streak with Earth's rotation until the sphere flickered into view at 12:09. The light pulsed, brightening precisely when my heart's green LED blinked. Night settled in, and the hum began low and deep, vibrating through the ground. I was tracking something on my camera screen, its pulsing rhythm perfectly aligned with my heartbeat. Even when I shifted the scope slightly, the object remained centered. My phone buzzed with a mountain storm alert, but the skies around me were calm. Orion lay curled on the rug, his legs twitching in some distant dream. Sleep eluded me, and by 3 a.m., the humming had grown more intense, like the earth itself was trembling beneath the house's foundation. Boots on, I stepped outside with Orion trailing silently. The Milky Way had vanished behind overcast clouds, but above the mesa, a sickly green glow pierced through the darkness, flickering in and out of visibility. At the yard gate, I paused, feeling an unseen presence watching from the ridge. "Who's there?" I called, my voice barely a whisper. Orion growled and we hurried back inside. Morning revealed something strange in the camera logs. The mysterious sphere had appeared 6 times between 12:07 and 10:02 a.m., each sighting precisely 5 minutes apart. Its light pulsed in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat, which had remained steady between 70 and 75 BPM. The storm alert never materialized. Seeking a better view, I drove to the old radio tower with Orion riding shotgun. The dirt road was rough, carved by wash channels. An empty shed at the tower provided a stable platform for my equipment. As twilight approached, wind gusted more forcefully than predicted, metal components of the tower rattling ominously. Orion paced restlessly, his hackles raised. At exactly 12:07 a.m., the camera's shutter clicked. In the eyepiece, the orb emerged, a muted green sphere with trembling edges, suspended in the sky. I panned across the ridgeline, but nothing else stirred. No aircraft, no tower lights, just this mysterious sphere breathing in sync with my own chest. When I tried to steady the tripod, the camera head slipped, momentarily capturing only darkness. Refocusing quickly, I found the orb had vanished. Moments later, Orion barked twice sharp and distant. Looking up, I saw a shape crouching at the tower's base. I rounded the bend in Mockingbird Canyon just after sunset, the old Kenworth W900 stash flickering. No fancy electronics, but the speedo and tack dropped out for a heartbeat before returning. Reddish canyon walls glowed in the last daylight as I shrugged off the glitch. Heat mirages do weird things to metal, I thought. Months of supply runs out of Indian Springs had made this route routine. Hugging the desert floor just under the restricted airspace near Groom Lake, I relied on old-fashioned paper maps. No need for glitchy electronics to guide me. At 25 miles per hour, I eased off the gas, but every gauge fluttered again. The clock even ticked backward for a second. Later that night, I sat in darkness, watching my laptop screen. Tower footage showed the sphere only in the first shot of the sequence. No subsequent flicker. I tried stretching the videos. Nothing. Orion slept at my feet as I stared at the wall clock. 1:16 a.m. 30 seconds later, a cold gust rattled the window panes. My pulse spiked to 90 BPM. I pressed my hand to my chest. No light. Drifting off, I dreamed of the orb flickering inside me, pulses echoing across the desert. The hum woke me, full and low. The house seemed to lean with the vibration. At the window, no glow above the mesa, just wind-tossed scrub and a sky turning gray with dawn. Coffee in hand, I watched Orion sniff the air, his tail low. That night, the camera on the dining table remained untouched. Every time I considered taking more photos, the shape at the tower and its pulsing light stopped me. I checked the footage again, frame by frame, heartbeat by heartbeat, realizing how little I truly saw. Earlier, at the tower, a ladder stood dark as night, slender and still. My flashlight beam swung, but the figure retreated before the light found it. Orion wed, backpedaling, until I pulled him close. I didn't wait another flicker. Packing up my gear in the wind, my heart pounded so loudly I thought neighbors would hear. On the drive home, I constantly checked the rearview mirror, seeing cliffs lit by headlights until they vanished behind hills. Outside, the desert sighed under the wind. Somewhere up there, the sphere pulsed on calm, distant, keeping its own rhythm. Driving through the canyon, something strange happened to my truck. The engine suddenly died. Radio went silent, and cab lights dimmed. I tried the key. Nothing. Climbing down to check the hood, I found the generator looked perfect. No loose wires. The alternator belt had proper tension. Back inside the cab, everything roared back to life. The dash lights flickered, the engine rumbled, and an old blues track crackled through the radio. Something felt off about the sound, like the speaker was slightly misaligned. I drove on without questioning the odd moment. That night, I made camp under a spectacular star-filled sky. The Milky Way blazed overhead. Scout, my lean black lab mix, rested his head on my boot while I cooked beans on a portable stove. The wind had settled, leaving the desert unnaturally still. A deep, steady hum caught my attention, not from my vehicle, and too low to be a road grader. I shut the stove and scanned the darkness. Canyon wind echoes still rang in my ears. My flashlight swept across the scrub landscape. Nothing moved. Scout licked his snout, Probably nothing, bud, I said, yet neither of us looked away from the ridge. Midnight came. I crawled into the sleeper, half listening to Scout's soft snoring and the refrigerator's faint hum. My dreams twisted, rock faces shifting, gauges spinning, that mysterious deep hum pulsing with my heartbeat. Scout's whine woke me. The cab was freezing. Ice crystals formed on the dash. Winter had arrived early. Moonlight cast a pale glow across the rest stop lot. I rubbed my eyes and hit the heater. The temperature gauge flickered wildly between low and high. When I reached to touch it, my hand passed through a ripple in the glass, like disturbing a pond's surface. Scout moved to the window, pressing his muzzle against the glass. His tail wagged slowly. I leaned closer. Beyond the ridge, under the starry blanket, I saw it, a shape too geometric to be natural. A dark angular form perched at the canyon's edge, broad at the base, rising about 20 feet, tapering slightly at the top. No lights, but edges so sharp they seemed to slice through starlight. I blinked. The shape remained. Scout whined and backed away. Grabbing my coat and flashlight, I unlatched the door. The air hit me like a freezer's breath, cold and electric. I clicked on the torch and swept it up the canyon wall. The beam vanished halfway, swallowed by darkness. No reflection. No shadow. I switched it off. The shape disappeared. The next morning, I drove that stretch again, checking if the gauges would glitch like before. They didn't. No deep cold, no hum. The canyon rim looked ordinary, morning sun hitting the rock and turning it orange. I resisted the urge to search for that dark shape. Back home, I reviewed the dash camera. The unit recorded fine, but the timestamps jumped backward for a few seconds around midnight, then forward again. The footage showed an empty canyon wall, just lens glare, shifting wind, and me leaning toward the screen. I leaned back and scratched my head. Scout watched me, tail wagging, as sunlight streamed through the blinds. Maybe it was all in my head, I told him. He licked my hand, eyes half closed. Earlier, when I got home, the living room was warm, and the bed inviting. Scout circled twice before sinking into his blanket. I dropped my keys on the table and checked my phone. No messages. I sat on the couch, staring at the dark window. The day before had been different. My heart was pounding. The wind kicked up, rattling trailer doors. Scout's eyes were wide, nudging my leg. I yanked the cab door shut, locking us inside. Gauges calmed. The heater kicked in. Radio spat static. I pressed the tuner. Just static. No station. By dawn, frost had melted, and the sky turned pale gray. I walked Scout around the lot. No disturbance, no footprints in the dust. Beyond the pavement, the canyon rim looked like any other desert rock. I climbed back into the cab and punched in my route to Indian Springs. Everything worked perfectly. Gauge needles, steady. Radio tuned, clear to traffic. Scout curled up on the bunk as I eased the truck into gear. On the drive back, I stared at canyon lights fading in my mirror. Fuel economy dropped, engine idling rough as I passed the rim. I rolled down the window and heard it again. That low, insistent hum pressed against the glass like a living thing. My heart thudded. I glanced up. The sky was empty. I parked at the depot. Scout hopped down, and I slapped the lock shut. My dispatcher asked if everything was okay. Yes. No problems, I said, my voice tired and too loud in the quiet office. At night, I found myself watching the window, waiting for frost on the sill, listening for that hum under the road. But the house stayed silent. The desert remained still beyond the walls. Still, every time I start the rig, I glance at the canyon. I ran a small garage on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada for nearly 2 decades. This was a tiny place, barely marked on maps, right in the heart of Area 51 territory. Most days were routine, with locals and occasional travelers passing through. But some jobs were different. strange in ways that made me question everything I thought I knew. The vehicles that came through were unlike anything I'd seen before. Engines completely dead, panels warped in impossible ways. I'd work on cars, trucks, ATVs, and the metal would look like it had been manipulated by some massive, invisible force. No dents, no scratches. Just this weird rippling effect, as if the metal had been softened, stretched, and then hardened again. Drivers would tell me their stories. Engines cutting out suddenly on the highway near the restricted area. No warning, no sputtering, just absolute silence. Some claimed they saw strange lights in the sky moments before. I used to dismiss these as wild imagination or exaggeration, but the evidence was right in front of me. Damaged vehicles that defied explanation. One summer night around 10 p.m., with a strong wind making the desert feel unexpectedly cold. I was closing up the garage. Something caught my eye out on the highway past the ridge. A bright rectangular shape, hovering motionless about 50 feet above the ground. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever seen. No wings, no blinking lights. Just a crisp, glowing rectangle that seemed too precise to be a natural phenomenon. I rolled down the road in my pickup, windows down, listening to the wind whip past. The light remained perfectly still. When I pulled over to get a closer look, it vanished. No sound, no flash, just gone. Like checking my gauges when passing Mockingbird Canyon, I was half expecting something to tremble, half afraid it actually would. I grew up in Rachel, Nevada, a tiny dot on the map everyone associates with Area 51. Back then, I never paid much attention to alien stories until they started unfolding right outside our home. My wife Jenny, our son Sam, and our German Shepherd, Mix Nellie lived a quiet life in the desert. One late spring evening, just after sunset, everything changed. The desert was unusually cool, with barely a whisper of wind through the sagebrush. We were sitting on the porch when Nellie suddenly went rigid. She wasn't barking or whining, just frozen, staring intently at the sky. At first, I assumed she was tracking a plane or helicopter, but nothing was visible. Above the hills behind our house, where the desert stretched endlessly toward Groom Lake, a cluster of stars began to pulse strangely. This wasn't like normal star twinkling. It was a slow, rhythmic brightening and dimming, almost as if the entire group was breathing. I rubbed my eyes, convinced it was an optical illusion or my exhausted mind playing tricks. Jenny confirmed something was off, squinting and remarking that this wasn't normal. Sam remained quiet, his face turned upward. Nellie's hackles raised, and she emitted a deep, uncharacteristic growl that didn't sound like any dog I'd ever heard. Usually protective but friendly, her behavior was distinctly different. Later, driving my truck through that same dark desert, I encountered something equally strange. A brief encounter with a weird light and warping shapes lasted maybe 30 seconds. My truck's gauges showed everything normal, with no glitches or interference. My dog Roscoe sat beside me, ears perked, softly growling at the empty highway. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the memory. Those cars with dead engines and strange breakdowns seemed connected to that mysterious light. None of my customers ever reported anything similar, just sudden vehicle failures. I kept the experience to myself, knowing people would either laugh or ask uncomfortable questions. Today, I still work on cars and trucks in this remote area. But on quiet nights when the wind picks up, I find myself scanning the highway, wondering if that glowing rectangle will reappear. I stood on the porch, pacing in tight circles, with my eyes locked on the pulsing cluster of stars. Jenny was nearby, and I tried to dismiss what I was seeing as some kind of optical illusion. But the movement wasn't subtle. The stars shifted position slowly, clustering closer together, and then spreading out in a way I'd never seen before. Sleep was impossible that night. Nellie, our dog, paced at the foot of the bed, alert to sounds beyond my hearing. The next few nights grew increasingly strange. The star cluster pulsed brighter each evening, and Nellie's behavior became more unpredictable. Sometimes she'd bark sharply at nothing, other times freezing in place, staring intensely. Sam, our son, suggested it might be aliens. We laughed it off, not wanting to worry him. But about a week later, everything changed. Around 11:30 p.m., I was in the kitchen getting water when a strange glow caught my eye through the window facing the hills. Jenny and Sam were asleep upstairs. Nellie sat at the back door, ears perked, tail stiff and rigid. The glow was unlike anything I'd seen before, a steady pale blue light that didn't flicker like fire or a flashlight. It hovered just above the ridge, maybe a mile away, casting a faint illumination across the rocky desert landscape. When I stepped outside, I noticed a low hum, not quite a sound, but a vibration that settled into my bones, making my skin prickle and my teeth feel gritty. Nellie erupted into violent barking, her urgent sounds waking Jenny and Sam. They rushed down, Jenny in her pajamas, Sam rubbing sleep from his eyes. We stood together on the porch, watching. The light pulsed gently, matching the rhythm of the earlier star cluster. Suddenly, a dark shape emerged beyond the ridge, a smooth, rounded silhouette, larger than any desert animal or vehicle I'd ever seen. No visible lights or markings, just that pale glow reflecting off its surface. Nellie went wild, snarling and snapping at the air. We had to hold her back. Then, without warning, the shape lifted off the ground, rising silently except for that low, growing hum. A month into my night janitor job, for a private contractor near Area 51, strange things started happening. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., cleaning offices, break rooms, and maintenance halls. I never shared what I witnessed. Who would believe me? And honestly, I wasn't even sure what I was experiencing. One clear, cool night during my break, I sat by a large window overlooking the restricted area. Stars dotted the sky, and the base was quiet. But the horizon told a different story. Weird flickering lights danced in random patterns, not like typical security lights or vehicle headlights. Sometimes they were barely visible, other times bright enough to cast eerie shadows in the room. Later, something shot up from the hills. It hovered silently, then glided across the ridge before vanishing behind a thicker line of hills. An unsettling silence followed. Jenny noticed a strange scent, a mix of ozone and burnt rubber hanging in the air. I walked closer to where the glow had been and found scorched earth. The soil looked baked, cracked, and dry, as if heated from beneath. Nellie, our dog, refused to calm down. She paced the yard for hours, growling low and staring intently at the hills. The next morning, I investigated with a flashlight. The scorched patch was small, maybe 8 or 10 feet across, with a burn mark suggesting something heavy had pressed against the ground. No footprints or tire tracks were visible. That week, the pulsing light cluster disappeared. The low hum vanished. Nellie settled slightly, but continued watching the hills, as if expecting something. We shared the story with a few locals who had their own tales about strange lights near the base. But nothing new emerged. I keep thinking about that night. The lights movement, the unusual smell, Nellie's reaction. One thing is certain. Whatever it wasn't normal, and it definitely wasn't here for a friendly visit. It never came close enough to truly see. Maybe that's why I'm still here telling you this story. During my night shift, an old radio scanner from the janitor's closet became my unexpected companion. I started tuning into local frequencies and contractor channels, just looking for something to break the monotony. At first, it was standard chatter maintenance teams, security patrols. Then things got strange. The whispers weren't like normal conversation. They were low, almost sibilant murmurs, in a language I couldn't identify. When I tried recording them, the audio files would glitch or corrupt completely. The voices emerged only through static bursts, fading in and out unpredictably. No matter how I adjusted the dial, they would vanish. I rationalized it as interference or nearby town pranks, but something felt off. These weren't random noises. They seemed intentional. Some nights, if I tuned carefully, I'd catch fragments of words alien and incomprehensible, but definitely present. The strange occurrences expanded beyond sound. Footsteps would approach my window, not the usual patrol rhythms, but soft, deliberate, and slow. Each time I looked, nothing was there, just empty desert and distant fence lines. Around 2 a.m., on one particular night, movement caught my eye. A faint glow drifted along the base perimeter fence, floating silently just above ground. The moment I focused directly on it, it disappeared. This became a pattern, flickering lights through the brush, small orbs that vanished when tracked. I wasn't scared, exactly, more unsettled. Like something was watching me, and I was watching back. Shadows near the fence, never quite solid. Shapes that didn't resemble people or animals. Once, I glimpsed something crouching near a fence post, but it dissolved into the desert darkness when I blinked. Sometimes the whispers transformed. One night, they became almost rhythmic, like a chant. I remember gripping the radio, sweating, desperately trying to understand. The voices never grew louder, but they became more intense. I worked at Area 51 for about 5 years as a tech, handling maintenance on some of the older underground systems. My job wasn't glamorous or high-level. I never had clearance for anything labeled as a special project. But even the routine work was strange enough to make you wonder what was really going on. Most nights, I was alone in the maintenance tunnels, or massive control rooms where the walls seemed to vibrate with an unsettling energy. The sounds were never completely clear, just a distant, haunting murmur that always faded before I could focus on it. One night, my dog Tilly started growling at the window, staring intensely at the fence line, something she'd never done before. She wouldn't stop even when I tried to calm her. A light near the fence flickered, faint but definite. Tilly's fur bristled, and she backed away slowly. After that incident, I began locking my door and double-checking windows, keeping the blinds drawn. It felt like whatever was out there wanted me to see it, but not too closely. Once, I caught a reflection in the glass, something behind me when I was alone in the room. I spun around. Nothing was there. I thought about quitting, but I needed the money. The shifts were quiet, except for the unexplainable noises. One night, the voices got louder, almost like they were right beside me. The scanner crackled and then cut out completely. When I went to check the breaker box in the hall and opened the panel, the air turned ice cold. I swear I saw a thin shadow slip past the far doorframe. I closed the panel quickly and left the building. Outside, the desert was calm. Tilly was pacing nervously. That night, the fence lights went completely dark for about 5 minutes, with no security announcements. When the power returned, the lights flickered strangely for a few seconds before going back to normal. I finally handed in my resignation. Before leaving, I packed up the radio scanner and salvaged what recordings I could. Most files were corrupted or blank, with only a few fragments of that whispering remaining. Now I'm home, miles away from that desert and those shadows, but sometimes, late at night, I swear I still hear faint murmurs in the background, like a radio picking up static on an empty frequency. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, Tilly stares out the window, her ears twitching as if waiting for something to return. The tunnels were alive with a strange, low humming that seemed to seep up from beneath the desert floor. This wasn't like any mechanical noise you could point to. No obvious fan or motor. It was a steady vibration that ran deep through your bones, subtle yet persistent. At first, I thought it was just normal background noise, like air conditioning. But over time, I realized it wasn't consistent. Sometimes the compound would seem to breathe, the sound swelling and shifting. Other moments, it would pulse in odd, almost organic rhythms. One particular night stands out. I had just finished checking a server bank in the West Wing. Emergency red lights cast a dim glow through the pitch-dark space. My dog Hobo, a scrappy mutt I'd smuggled in, was with me. He always hated these tunnels, his fur bristling and whining, as if sensing something was wrong. That night, Hobo was especially uneasy. As we were heading back, the humming suddenly changed, growing louder, more insistent, almost like a beckoning call. He stopped dead, staring down a corridor I'd never noticed before. It was normally a sealed, restricted area, but now the door stood slightly ajar. A faint blue glow seemed to leak from the crack. Curiosity pulled me forward, but Hobo growled and tugged at his leash. My gut told me to turn back. Before I could decide, the humming shifted again, hitting a new, deeper frequency. It was almost musical, unlike anything I'd ever heard. The sound vibrated through the air around us. The blue light flickered and vanished, leaving only darkness. When I tried the door, it was locked tight. My phone's screen went black when I attempted to take a picture. Suddenly, Hobo bolted, dragging me back the way we'd come. His barking echoed through the tunnels until we burst into the main hallway, where the mysterious hum faded to silence. I reported the strange light to my supervisor, but he dismissed it as old wiring or a maintenance crew's forgotten lights. Something told me it was far more complex than that. The next morning, I went to check the security camera footage, knowing something unusual had happened. I knew the system well enough to pull up some older recordings from a restricted wing I wasn't supposed to access. At first, the footage seemed ordinary, just dark hallways, empty rooms, and blinking consoles. Around 3:13 a.m., something changed. The camera outside that restricted door caught a strange phenomenon. A faint shimmer appeared, like heat waves on hot asphalt. This shimmer gradually transformed into a shape, a craft, or something craft-like. It had no lights or markings, just a smooth, dark object hovering silently a few feet off the ground. The shape was unstable, constantly shifting like a mirage or water reflection. One moment oval, the next angular, its edges blurring and reforming like smoke in a breeze. Most unsettling was its complete silence. No hum, no drone, just absolute quiet. After about 4 minutes, it dissolved as if it had never existed. I quietly showed the footage to a few coworkers, but nobody wanted an open discussion. Management offered weak explanations about prototype drones or security system tests, yet they couldn't explain the shimmer or the object's vanishing act. A week later, the humming returned, louder this time, vibrating through the walls with an intensity that seemed intent on shaking the entire building. That night, the cameras captured the same shimmering shape. This time, it appeared to be watching, not just the cameras, but something beyond them. When I tried reporting up the chain, my superiors dismissed my concerns. They claimed it was classified experimental technology, something I wasn't cleared to understand. I was told to forget about it and focus on maintenance. But I couldn't. The feeling wasn't mechanical. Something felt alive down there, watching and waiting. Hobo, our dog, would sit quietly at tunnel entrances, staring into darkness, as if sensing movement just beyond the lights. I caught myself doing the same, overwhelmed by a sense of being observed. I left the base a year ago. They didn't fire me. I simply grew tired of the silence and secrets. Yet the humming still haunts my dreams, and sometimes, when I look up at the Nevada night sky, I see that same shimmering shape drifting just beyond the stars. No one talks about what's really down there, but I know it's not just machines. I worked at Area 51 for about 3 years, tucked away in one of the labs far from the main gates and hangars, as a project engineer. My real job involved helping with reverse engineering on things no one outside the base was supposed to know about. Even now, a year after leaving, I can't fully explain everything I witnessed. Contrary to Hollywood movies, there were no alien autopsies or flying saucers sitting out in the open. Instead, the facility was filled with high-tech military equipment that looked like something straight out of a sci-fi film. But it was all real. What truly struck me wasn't the technology itself, but how some devices behaved in ways no machine ever had before. We ran tests on vehicles with seemingly impossible capabilities. the ability to phase through solid objects. Our experiments typically involved placing a prototype in a sealed metal chamber with thick walls designed to contain and test these machines. Through reinforced glass and cameras, we'd watch the vehicles start on one side of the chamber. Occasionally, something extraordinary would happen. The vehicle would simply vanish from one spot and reappear on the other side, as if it had passed through the wall. No sound, no vibration, just complete disappearance. Not every test worked this way, but when it did, it was mind-bending. Sometimes the vehicle would vanish entirely, only to reappear in another testing bay hundreds of meters away, completely undamaged. These moments created an incredible tension. The team would quickly shut down cameras and erase footage. Everyone sensed we were exploring something we didn't understand, and perhaps shouldn't be investigating. Subtle side effects followed these tests. Muscle strains, headaches, moments of dizziness. I remember Lyle, a mechanic, collapsing during a shift, claiming his body felt like it was vibrating internally. Whatever this technology was, it had been there longer than any of us, and I don't think it ever stopped watching. The base was a pressure cooker of tension after the incident in the chamber. An experiment had gone wrong, and the man looked like he'd been torn apart and reassembled. Instantly, they whisked him away, and access to the chamber became strictly controlled. What haunted me wasn't the technology or the physical trauma, but the systematic dismissal of risk. Engineers and scientists raised alarms, yet their warnings were routinely ignored. The military's stance was clear. Experimental risks were an expected part of the job, but something this volatile demanded more respect. My nights became increasingly strange. During one quiet evening, with only distant generator hums and my dog Juno's occasional bark breaking the silence, I noticed something unusual. The chamber door was slightly open. Juno grew restless, tugging at her leash and refusing to approach. A faint shimmer caught my eye, like precise heat waves, cool and quick. It flickered briefly near the doorframe before vanishing. Moments later, a soft thud came from inside the empty chamber. When security arrived, they found nothing. No damage, no signs of entry, and the cameras had conveniently gone dark an hour earlier. Weird occurrences became routine. Electronic badges would fail, lights would flicker unpredictably, and machines would momentarily disappear from view. One night near the base's outer perimeter, a deep, earthen hum filled the air. A pale, dim light hovered over a hangar, not like any aircraft or spotlight I'd seen. It pulsed softly and then disappeared. My reports to leadership were met with dismissive, generic responses. Nothing unusual, they said, but I knew something was happening just beyond our understanding, something the official narratives couldn't explain. For about 6 months, I was a pilot trainee at Area 51, and nothing about that place felt normal. We flew mostly small, single-engine planes, twitchy and responsive, perfect for tight maneuvers. My instructor, Lester, was tough but fair. He'd send us out over a specific desert stretch, mostly flat with a wide mesa to the west, running navigation drills. It was routine, except for this one zone, where everything seemed to glitch. On my 3rd or 4th solo flight, circling near a desert patch just east of Groom Lake, at about 5,000 feet, I first noticed something strange. As I approached the area, my compass started spinning like a broken record. No matter how I banked or turned, it whirled crazily, refusing to settle on a heading. I figured it was a magnetometer problem and kept flying by relying on visual GPS cues. But then the radio started acting up. Static flooded the comms, drowning out Lester's voice. For a solid minute, I couldn't hear him at all, just a loud, high-pitched crackle. It freaked me out enough to pull back and get away from the zone. Lester was surprisingly calm when I returned to base, saying the equipment had moments like that, and telling me to log it as an electrical issue. The way they dodged questions, the classified status, the silence, it all made me uneasy. Eventually, I quit. The longer I stayed, the more I felt the base was hiding something beyond just technology. The machines that could phase through walls were just the start. I didn't want to be part of whatever came next. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the spot near my old lab, wondering if those vehicles still vanish and reappear somewhere out there, defying everything we know about physics. Juno, my dog, sometimes stiffens and looks toward the desert, ears alert, like she senses something invisible. I don't know what was really going on, but I'm certain of one thing. Some of the things we uncovered at Area 51 weren't just secret tech. They were something else, something that doesn't fit. And whatever it wasn't done yet. During my flights over that area, something strange started happening. At first, it seemed like a minor technical glitch. A colleague had mentioned staying alert, but I didn't think much of it. But then the pattern repeated. Each time I flew near that specific location, my instruments went haywire. The compass would spin wildly, and radio static would crackle unpredictably. Gone about my 5th or 6th flight, curiosity got the better of me. That day, the wind was intense, with sudden gusts and rapid shifts. As I approached within a couple miles of the cliff edge, something extraordinary stopped me in my tracks. A massive, dark shape hovered just above the mesa. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd ever encountered. The object was enormous, almost rectangular, but with softened edges. It hung completely motionless, defying the powerful winds buffeting around it. No engines, no lights, no sound, nothing. I pulled back the throttle and banked to keep it in view, attempting to radio in my observations. But the static was overwhelming, blocking all communication attempts. Watching wide-eyed, I wondered if my mind was playing tricks. The shape remained absolutely still, not moving a fraction. Then, suddenly, it vanished. In an instant, only empty sky and wind-blown dust remained where the object had been moments before. Hovering in disbelief, I wanted to investigate further. But with communications down and instruments malfunctioning, I couldn't trust my equipment. Back at base, I reported the incident carefully, sticking strictly to the observable facts. Lester's reaction was telling. He nodded as if expecting something unusual, but remained cryptically silent. When I discreetly inquired with other pilots, nobody would confirm seeing anything similar. More unsettling, my entire flight record from that day had disappeared. The tracking system showed a complete blank, no video, no data, nothing. Despite maintenance confirming the system was fully operational. Lester dismissed my concerns as a simple data glitch. His response suggested I shouldn't dig deeper. From then on, I continued flying, but studiously avoided that mesa. The area remained strange. Compasses spinning, radios hissing with static, an inexplicable sense of something being fundamentally off. I woke to a low rumble just after midnight. No thunder rumbled overhead, and the sky was clear, but the whole house trembled like a distant freight train was passing underneath the foundation. I lay still, listening to the bass note grow stronger, then fade into silence. My dog Bramble, a brindle shepherd mix with a twitchy tail, lifted her head, ears pricked, and whimpered once before settling back down. The next morning, I opened the kitchen window to let in the cool desert air. Condensation beaded on the glass, clinging like dew. When I ran my finger across it, a dark shape held its form, a tall figure with arms outstretched, before melting into a smear. I pressed harder, but nothing was on the other side. After wiping the glass clean, I looked out at the empty backyard. That evening, I sat on the porch with Bramble at my feet. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a thin pink glow on the hills. A softer rumble returned, like something shifting underground. Bramble growled low, her fur lifting along her spine. I scanned the desert floor, just sand, scrub brush, and the old water tank inherited from the farmhouse's previous owner. I told myself it was nothing but the wind, though I knew better. 2 nights later, I woke before dawn. The house vibrated louder now, and the floorboards hummed. I stumbled into the hallway, feeling the walls pulse around me. Bramble padded behind, panting, flicking on a lamp in the living room. I saw the windows were completely covered in heavy, chalky condensation, frost-like patterns swirling in circles. When I reached out, the mist peeled away in lines as if something had run its fingers over the glass. Pulling my hand back revealed only my own print. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. It reminded me of another time, another flight, when something inexplicable hung near a patch of earth where the rules seemed to change. Instruments died. Radio went silent. Something hovered, defying logic. I finished that training and left the base shortly after. No one ever mentioned that flight again. Official records showed no trace of the incident, but I remember. And I still wonder what I flew so close to, hovering just out of reach over that lonely Nevada mesa. My chest rumbled as my slippers touched the ground. Something felt off. Bramble's reaction was immediate. Teeth bared, she sniffed the air and bolted toward the fence line. When I called her back, she froze at the yard's corner, staring into pitch-black darkness. The flashlight revealed nothing. No movement, no headlights, just desert shadows dancing in the wind. Earlier that day, I'd driven into town for groceries. At the diner, something felt strange. The windows were clear, but the locals looked exhausted. Old Mr. Lin mentioned hearing a low-frequency hum for weeks. Maria, the waitress, nervously rubbed her arms, describing how her windows fogged up despite cranking the heat. That night seemed calm. No tremors, no mysterious sounds. I slept more deeply than I had in weeks. Dawn brought an unsettling discovery. The glass backyard door hung ajar, its latch unhooked. Bramble watched me with worried eyes, curled on the porch. I carefully closed and locked the door, checking every window. Though the condensation had vanished, faint footprints in the dirt caught my eye. Small, like a child's, trailing toward distant hills. 2 days later, the weather shifted dramatically. A thick fog rolled in after sunset, swallowing the porch light and turning everything into a gray soup. I drew every curtain closed and sat by the window, Bramble on my lap. The familiar low, steady hum returned, vibrating through my teeth. Glass steamed up instantly, forming ghostly patterns. Glimpses of a face, a hand, then nothing. I stared until my eyes watered. Bramble suddenly growled and leaped away, fur bristling. I switched on all the lights and turned on the TV for comfort. Local channels droned about dust storms and rattlesnake sightings. Nothing about strange rumbles or haunted windows. On the 5th night, I prepared tomato soup for myself and Bramble. She sat at the kitchen table, enjoying a hint of chili. Just as I took my first bite, the rumble began. My spoon clattered down as the table trembled. Soup sloshed against the bowl's rim. Bramble's whiskers twitched, and she backed away. Glass cabinet doors rattled. Then abruptly, silence. Everything stopped. Even Bramble went still. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling a faint, pulsing warmth underneath, like a hidden heartbeat. Pushing my chair back, I left the soup. I needed fresh air. Bramble followed, padding softly over the gravel. The trip started like any typical camping weekend. My brother Caleb, our friends Sarah and Tim, and I drove out near Groom Lake, just past the restricted zone's edge. We wanted to escape the city's constant noise and cell service, aiming to spend a few nights under the stars without distractions. I've camped around Nevada for years, but this place felt different. An unusual quiet hung in the air. We arrived late afternoon on a hot, dry, early June day. The sky was mostly clear, with a thin haze on the horizon blurring the mountains like an old photograph. About a mile from the lake bed, we chose a campsite on a gentle slope, with an expansive desert view stretching ahead. Our campfire had just begun to crackle, when Caleb's usually mellow dog, Roscoe, suddenly stiffened and growled low. That got everyone's attention. We all turned. Later, we stood under a star-filled sky, cooled by the night breeze. The fog bank had burned off earlier. No movement disturbed the silence. Just the empty desert breathing under the moonlight. By morning, the windows were clear. All night's condensation vanished. Fresh footprints lined the fence, small, neat ovals, spaced as if someone had been treading carefully. I packed a bag that day, planning to stay with a friend 2 towns over. Yet each time I approached the front door, something felt like it watched from beneath my feet, waiting to be noticed. That night, dreams came, shapes forming on glass, glowing lines etched into walls, a low hum rising from below. I woke stiff and heavy-eyed, Bramble pressed close. I told her everything would be okay, but my voice sounded distant. At dawn, I opened my eyes to the front door. The driveway was The sun cleared the horizon. For the first time in days, only wind in the sagebrush and Bramble's soft toenails clacking on the porch broke the silence. I'm still here, watching the highway, waiting for my friend's truck. The rumble hasn't returned. The windows remain clear, but I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the one who decided to leave. Something has been pulling at the edges of this place, and I'm uncertain when they'll follow. We were out in the desert when something caught our eye. About 200 feet away, a strange triangular shape hovered low to the ground. At first, we thought it might be a helicopter or drone, but it was completely silent, no sounds of rotors or engines, just a soft, steady glow. The object was roughly the size of a small car, with no visible seams or windows. Its edges seemed almost fluid, like a shadow you could reach out and touch. The light was dim, almost as if it was trying to remain unnoticed. It hung about 10 feet above the ground, perfectly motionless, despite the breeze rustling nearby bushes. Slowly, it descended and touched the sand. Something felt different about the landing spot. The ground seemed colder, as if all the day's heat had been suddenly drained away. Caleb stepped closer and reached down, quickly pulling his hand back like the sand had stung him. Roscoe started barking, not his usual excited bark, but a sharp, tense warning. When I tried to take a picture, my phone screen went blank. No signal, no battery icon. Sarah's phone did the same, and Tim's watch stopped completely. We backed up, feeling trapped. An oppressive silence hung in the air. The craft remained still, its soft light unchanged. After 5 or 6 minutes, the lights inside the triangle began to dim until it was almost completely dark. Then, as silently as it had arrived, it rose straight up into the sky and vanished. No engine noise, no bright flash, just gone. The desert seemed to relax. Tension lifted, the air felt warmer, and the breeze picked up as if nothing unusual had happened. We sat in stunned silence. Roscoe calmed down but remained alert. We left early the next morning. Our devices continued to malfunction for hours, even miles away from the site. During the drive home, an unsettling feeling persisted, like we were being watched. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, there was nothing but empty road and sky. I'm not sure what we encountered that night, but it was unlike anything I've ever experienced or read about. One thing was certain, this was no ordinary desert phenomenon. The night shift was winding down just past 11 p.m. when the unexpected shipment arrived. I was on my final run of the evening, driving the forklift to Dock 12, where 6 white crates sat under bright floodlights. No one had mentioned these were coming. The crates were large, about 6 feet long, and 3 feet wide, sealed with strange symbols I'd never encountered before. Interlocking triangles and circles painted in a dull silver glinted under the light. When I tapped one with my gloved hand, the air around me felt different. It wasn't the typical desert cold, but something more intense, like the inside of a walk-in freezer that seemed to drain warmth from your bones. I tried calling to Hank down the hall, but the radio in my vest crackled and went silent as I hauled a crate onto the forklift and rolled toward the storage bay. A strange cold fog seemed to drift behind me, parting when I turned the corner. The wall temperature gauge read normal low 40s, but the air around those crates felt significantly colder. In the storage bay, other maintenance workers were loading parts into bins. When I set the crate down, a low hum started vibrating through the walls, similar to a massive transformer. Sarah from logistics looked up, frowning. "You bring these in?" she asked. I shook my head. She ran her hand over one of the mysterious symbols. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The hum grew louder, echoing through the steel beams. I reached for the emergency backup switch, but every light in the bay went dark except for a single red LED hovering over the crates. The hum faded to silence, leaving us in complete darkness save for that small red dot. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing on the crate symbols. They glowed softly, shining silver. No one spoke. I backed out of the bay, my light dancing over equipment and cables until power returned. 30 seconds later, regular lights flickered on. The hum was gone, and the crates looked as if they'd been there for weeks. The next morning, I checked the logs. The delivery manifest listed the crates as classified, with no origin or contents noted. When I asked supervision, I received only a brief, cryptic briefing. Something about that place had changed. Colder, quieter, heavier. And I still wonder if we were just lucky to be there to see it. I could feel the weight of those crates behind the fence. That day, I'd spent hours sweeping the hangar floor under the hot sun, thinking about the morning's briefing on top-secret program requirements. Later that night, I brought Roscoe, my recently adopted German Shepherd mix, to the base. While he ran in the yard near the guard station, I checked on the crates. Yard lights stretched long shadows across the scrub brush. Suddenly, Roscoe stopped at the fence line, his nose raised and hackles up. He growled softly. My flashlight revealed nothing, but that familiar metallic chill returned, like breathing next to ice. I patted Roscoe, muttering, "Probably just a draft," even as my teeth chattered. When I reached the bay door, I found it unlocked. The crates were gone. No forklift tracks, no skid marks, nothing. I radioed security, but the gate cameras showed an empty bay all night. Only the red LED above the doorway continued blinking quietly. Over the next few days, a soft hum began to spread through the base. At first, it sounded like a distant idling engine, then grew louder, thrumming inside the maintenance tunnels. Welders, electricians, and janitors all heard it. Sometimes it would start mid-afternoon, creeping through pipes and vibrating fixtures overhead. When it stopped, an intense silence would fall, as if the entire base had exhaled simultaneously. That week, something strange began happening. About half a dozen of us started having the same dream. In mine, I stood in the supply bay, surrounded by stacked crates in darkness, barely making out two white pinprick eyes floating at the back wall. I'd wake up gasping. Sheets, tangled. Sarah saw a similar dream, but from outside the bay doors. Hank witnessed the eyes through a floor grate, over coffee. We compared notes, something we'd never done before, but this felt too bizarre to ignore. One night, following the familiar low hum behind the corridor walls, I discovered a service hatch I'd never noticed. Roscoe padded behind me. The grate felt warm to the touch, the hum pulsing through my fingers like a steady heartbeat. With no one else around to call, I radioed maintenance during my shift. Crouching down, I pried the grate free. Cool air flowed up from a shaft of pure darkness. Roscoe whined and licked my hand as I shone my flashlight down, revealing nothing but an endless black void. 2 nights after dropping the grate, I was on patrol in the guard tower when the floodlights suddenly cut out. Stars pinpricked a clean slate sky above. The comms radio crackled static, then went silent. My torch flickered outside, revealing shadow shapes moving along the fence, tall and rigid, slipping between light and darkness. They looked like soldiers, but something was off. Too tall, too straight. They flowed like smoke, barely moving. Roscoe barked when I banged on the glass, startled awake. The shapes froze instantly and vanished like water slapped away. Floodlights clicked back on. Everything returned to normal, but my voice trembled when I radioed Central. Must have been wildlife, I told myself. My keys jingled as I headed home with Roscoe trailing. Mel mentioned her dream that night. "Ah, eyes," she whispered. "White eyes in the dark." Roscoe padded by her door, nose low, ears pinned. Now I try forgetting, but my flashlight stays close. Roscoe follows me everywhere. Sometimes I swear I feel that hum behind the walls, those faint white eyes watching from the window until I blink. Then they're gone. Earlier that night, I'd gotten the call around 10. Hangar D4 needed cleaning after a new drop-off. I grabbed my gear and Riley, a short-haired mutt with pointy ears, whose nervous energy made him perfect for late shifts. The desert was cooling, metal still radiating day's heat. At the base gate, the scanner blinked green. Riley's tail wagged once before settling. Hangar D4 sat in near darkness. A single motion-activated bulb hung above the door. My ID badge clicked the lock open. Inside, Riley sniffed crates and coiled cables while I leaned my mop in the corner. The cavernous space hummed softly from overhead air handlers. I started pressure washing oil stains from the concrete, Riley's wet paws slapping behind me. Water swirled around wooden pallets, draining into floor grates. Up close, the walls looked freshly sprayed. Fresh paint, no scuffs covered the walls of the storage space. Only empty flight cases and a single rolling ladder occupied the room. As I climbed up to wipe the overhead pipes, a low rhythmic vibration caught my attention, almost like a distant pulse. My hand gripped the ladder rail, and Riley froze below, ears alert. "You hear that?" I called out, but my voice disappeared into the echoing space. The pulse vanished, leaving only the air handler's steady hum. I shrugged, wiped my brow, and descended. While wheeling the ladder back, the lights began to flicker bright, then dim. Riley barked and raced toward the hangar door. I followed, but the door wouldn't open. The scanner panel glowed red. No power. I patted Riley's head, trying to calm him. The light switch by the door produced nothing, but suddenly the overhead bulb snapped on, casting yellow light across the floor. My phone's battery blinked red, and the radio on my vest only offered static when I tried channel 3. Grabbing a broom, I continued working. My headlamp beams swept the shadows and stopped. There, a disc-shaped outline hovered silently 10 feet up, beyond the stacked pallets. A perfect dark circle, it seemed to absorb light. A gossamer thin film shimmered across its surface, barely visible except when the light caught its edge. Riley whined, sniffing the air. A faint burnt ozone smell lingered, reminiscent of a recent lightning strike. My gloved hand inched forward, fingers passing through a misty boundary before I pulled back. In an instant, the disk vanished. I swept my headlamp across the space. Nothing remained. Riley circled me, growling softly. I backed away, broom in hand, until the overhead bulb popped and died. Darkness engulfed us. My phone was dead. Only Riley's red collar glowed, along with starlight seeping under the door. Feeling along the wall, I found the keypad. This time, it glowed green. The exit door groaned open, and we slipped out into the night. I slid out into the cool night, floodlights snapping on behind us as the hangar door clicked shut. Back online, the base's familiar hum settled around me. A patrol ATV rolled by, its driver eyeing Riley and me. "Everything okay?" "Just a flicker," I said tightly. He grunted and rode off into the desert. Quiet descended as I loaded the gear and drove home. Riley slept in the passenger seat, soft snores filling the truck, while I kept glancing at Hangar D4's dark silhouette in the rearview mirror. The dash clock blinked 12:03, though I was sure it was closer to 1 a.m. At home, I set the broom by the back door and checked on Riley. He stared down the hallway, something seeming to catch his attention. Lying in bed, I tossed and turned, convinced I saw soap-thin ripples on my bedroom wall with each blink. When dawn broke, I returned to the base to drop off equipment. Peering through the tiny window in Hangar D4's door, I found nothing empty. Lights off, no trace of the disk, no scorched concrete, not even a greasy fingerprint where I'd reached out. Later, In the weld shop, a mechanic asked if I'd lost sleep. I shrugged. Just a bad breaker, I think. That night at home, I found my mop lying across the hallway floor as if dropped in a hurry. I set it upright, Riley tracking my every move. Closing the door and killing the lights, only street lamp glow remained. I lay listening for a hum, half expecting that thin shimmer to drift across the wall. Instead, Riley's steady breathing and the refrigerator's quiet drone filled the silence. Normal. Yet something lingered, a memory of something that didn't belong. A perfect circle, smooth and still, cloaked in impossibly thin film, gone in a blink, leaving only the smell of ozone and a nagging, unshakable question. Out on the fence line just after sunset, Duncan, my Australian shepherd, Mick suddenly froze and let out a low whine. The day's heat was sliding away, and the sky hung in that dusty rose typical of Rachel, with Groom Lake just beyond the horizon. 10 years of ranching had taught me this landscape, and while it wasn't glamorous, it was steady work. But that night felt different. I climbed down from the fence post and walked toward the pens, calling for Duncan. I patted Duncan's side, his ears alert. The cattle were restless, shifting and moaning softly. Something was off. They twitched their tails and turned their heads away from something unseen. I swept my flashlight across the brush, expecting to spot a coyote, but saw nothing. Then they appeared. 3 figures moving between the feeder and far gate. Impossibly tall, at least a head higher than me, but unnaturally thin. Their limbs looked stretched and distorted, arms hanging past their knees, legs too long for their bodies. They moved in perfect synchronization, causing the cattle to scatter. Duncan barked low and urgent. The figures stopped and turned toward me. From my angle, their faces were just darkness. No features, only shadows where eyes should be. In an eerily coordinated motion, they lifted one arm in a slow wave and started walking away, gliding smooth as silk. "Hey!" I called out, hoping for a response. Silence. They slipped between the pens and vanished into the low scrub. My heart raced as I crouched by the rail, Duncan staying close with a stiff tail. Then the lights appeared. Not a patrol truck, but beams hovering 30 feet in the air, blinking in a precise grid. 3 flashes, pause. 3 flashes, pause. This continued for minutes beyond my calf pastures. My watch read 8:12 p.m., no sound. No radio static. I reached for my phone. No signal. My truck was a quarter-mile away by the barn. Running seemed risky, leaving the cattle alone. The figures reappeared at the edge of the blinking lights, their silhouettes sharp against the glow. They walked toward the lights, which pulsed brighter as if acknowledging them. I wanted to move closer, but my legs felt heavy. Duncan whined, tugging at his leash, urging us back. I let him lead me to the barn. Inside, the flickering lights cast dancing shadows on the corrugated wall. I grabbed the rifle, not for a fight, but for comfort. Hugging it close, I cracked the sliding door open and peered out. I sat on a bale of hay, my shirt soaked through with sweat, and called my neighbor's number. No answer, just voicemail. "Hey, saw something. Better drop by." The night before, Duncan had been at my leg when I first saw them. The tall figures moved among blinking lights, deliberate and slow. I'd pulled the door closed and latched it, my lantern flickering. 20 minutes later, I stepped back out. The horizon was dark, save for moonlight. Those figures were gone. The blinking vanished. The cattle grazed quietly, as if nothing unusual had occurred. I walked the perimeter, shining my beam into every corner, checking shrubs, rocks, looking for any sign of people or vehicles. Just my dog and me out there. Morning came sluggish. Under a pale sun, I fed cattle and checked fences. My mind kept drifting west, to that dead-still cluster of shrubs where the shapes had disappeared. When my neighbor rolled up on his ATV, coffee in hand, I pointed out what I'd seen. He dismissed it. Firelight reflections, maybe a crop sprayer with a broken nav light. He clapped his hands against the rifle rack. I nodded, but didn't believe him. I drove the service road beyond the ranch boundary. Nothing but desert fence posts curved along the road. Back home, I walked Duncan to the cattle pens. They watched us, chewing slowly, then scattered when I clicked my tongue. I leaned on the rail, breathing hard. Every rustle of sage made me turn. The day was solid, full of color. No shadows stretched too thin. Tonight, I'll sleep on the porch in a lawn chair, gun across my lap, Duncan at my feet. I'll watch that horizon for a flicker. Maybe tomorrow I'll find prints in the dust at the service road turn, prints that start, and just stop. I was hauling freight from Reno to Phoenix, driving through Nevada on a route that winds near the edges of the desert, close to Area 51. That day in early June was different from my usual runs. Late afternoon heat clung to my truck's cab as I rolled down the highway, watching the sun sink low and cast long shadows over rocky formations. The desert landscape was familiar. Dry air, a slight wind kicking up dust, nothing out of the ordinary. Country music played softly on the radio as I drove. Then I saw the convoy ahead, about 10 trucks and armored vehicles lined up perfectly on the highway shoulder, completely motionless. This wasn't like the military convoys I'd seen before. These vehicles were stopped, engines off, with no signs of an accident or checkpoint. The drivers and passengers stood outside in small groups, all staring intently at something beyond the road's edge. That's when I noticed it. A massive orb suspended between two rock formations about 100 yards away. This wasn't like any aircraft I'd encountered. It was enormous, with a surface that looked like a dull, breathing pearl. Soft light pulsed from within, shifting subtly between pale blue and faint amber. No sound accompanied this strange object. No engine hum. Nothing but the quiet desert wind and rustling scrub brush. The men near their trucks remained completely still, as if the orb had hypnotized them. Something about the scene felt profoundly unreal. I glanced at my dashboard. Everything appeared normal. The radio was just static, gauges steady. Cautious, I kept my distance but rolled down the window, wanting to understand what I was witnessing. I was just trying to get away from everything, camping near Area 51 with my dog Roscoe. Not as some conspiracy hunter, just needing some quiet time. But something weird happened out there in the desert that I can't shake. It started with a strange sound from an orb. At first, I thought it might be a light trick or some training exercise, but nothing added up. The highway was empty, with only a few men near their trucks, standing completely still. Slowly, the orb began to rise between the trucks. Its pulsing light faded, and suddenly the men snapped back to life, moving like they were waking from a deep trance. Engines roared to life, and the convoy rolled on as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. I stayed put, watching the spot where the orb had been, until it vanished completely, leaving only the desert and setting sun. When I got back on the highway, it was like the entire incident had been erased. No emergency crews showed up. No radio traffic mentioned anything. At a gas station down the road, the clerk looked at me like I was crazy when I asked about the military convoy. I checked my watch. An hour had passed, but it felt like just minutes. Night fell quickly, and I couldn't bring myself to call anyone. Something about the experience left me speechless. Parked in a motel near Bay, I stared out at the stars. The desert was unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. Roscoe, usually restless in new places, was surprisingly calm beside me. The next morning, the convoy was gone. No tracks, no signs on the road. Just me, Roscoe, and the empty desert stretching out as it always had. I still don't know what I saw. Maybe a military experiment or something else entirely. But it wasn't just a routine truck stop. There was something deliberate about that moment. A silence that suggested the desert was waiting for something we weren't supposed to notice. For the rest of the trip, I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if I was being watched, or if whatever it was still lurked just beyond the road's edge. Nevada's late September nights can be deceivingly cool, with a dry desert air, that settles over the landscape. I'd been out this way before, but never quite this close to the facility's perimeter. Selecting a spot about 100 feet from the chain-link fence, just off a gravel service road, I set up camp on a flat patch of sand surrounded by scrub brush. My tent was small, and Scout seemed uneasy at first. Once I started a low fire, he gradually calmed. The night progressed quietly, punctuated only by the distant highway hum and occasional desert creature sounds. I kept the fire minimal, careful not to attract unwanted attention. Watchtowers loomed about 30 yards away, their bright floodlights sweeping methodically across the barren landscape. Around midnight, something unusual happened. The floodlights suddenly dimmed and then shut off completely, as if a massive switch had been flipped. Darkness enveloped everything. Silence dominated the area, broken only by the soft breeze and Scout's quiet breathing. What caught my attention was a strange light emerging from deep within the base. Beyond the fence and darkened towers, faint, rhythmic pulses of bluish-white light began to blink in a deliberate, almost signal-like pattern. Scout's ears perked up, and he let out a low growl directed at the fence. The light pulses continued for about 3 minutes, sometimes fading almost to invisibility before brightening again. Their rhythm was irregular, making it difficult to establish a consistent pattern. Just as I was reaching for my phone, the power abruptly restored itself. Floodlights blazed back to life, harsh and expansive. Yet when I looked toward the source of those mysterious pulses, everything appeared completely normal. No guards patrolled, no vehicles idled, and the usual mechanical background noise had vanished. The entire sector seemed suspended in an eerie stillness. I watched intently for nearly an hour, but nothing stirred. Scout remained tense, staring intently at the fence, as if he could penetrate its solid barrier. Gradually, I began to relax, attempting to rationalize what I had just witnessed. I've lived out here on the outskirts of Rachel, Nevada for most of my life. My family's ranch is maybe 6-7 miles from that fenced-off government patch everyone calls Area 51. Most folks around here don't like to talk about what goes on near the base, but I've seen things over the years that I can't explain. For a while now, we've had these helicopters, unmarked, no logos or numbers, that come out after dark. They're loud when they fly in low and slow, patrolling just above the desert scrub. But sometimes they'll suddenly stop and hover so quietly that you could hear a pin drop if it wasn't for the faint whir of the blades. I'm not the type to spin wild stories, but what I'm about to say is real, even if I don't fully understand it. One night, something strange happened. Maybe it was a glitch or some kind of equipment test. The desert night returned to its usual quiet. The next morning, I woke early, sipping coffee outside my tent. Scout was sniffing around, digging a little here and there. When I looked down at the sand near where I'd been sitting the night before, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Several perfectly round burn marks in the sand. They were maybe the size of a dinner plate, blackened in the center with rings fading out to the edges. They didn't look like campfire scorch marks or anything from my stove. No rocks or fire pits nearby. Just these odd circular burns in an otherwise untouched patch of sand. I walked along the fence line, scanning for footprints or tire tracks. Nothing but my own tracks and Scout's paw prints. No sign anyone had been near us. No vehicles, no footprints from guards. I packed up and left right after breakfast. I didn't want to stick around. Something about those burn marks and that blackout didn't feel right. It was like I'd been watched, maybe tested, without knowing it. Back home, I tried looking up if anyone else had seen strange lights or power glitches near the base, but there's never any official word. I kept the photos I took of the burn marks, but the images didn't capture the way they looked in person. Oddly precise, almost unnatural. Sometimes at night, I swear I can still see those pulses in my mind, slow and steady, coming from somewhere just beyond the fence. And Scout won't sleep near me without keeping his ears up, as if whatever it was out there left something behind. The ranch had been quiet lately, but something felt off. My border collie Rufus sensed it too. He was a lean dog, with sharp eyes and a nervous energy that made him pace restlessly, his ears pinned back like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. It happened just past midnight a couple months back. The desert was silent except for an occasional breeze, and the moon was just a thin sliver, barely casting any light. I was checking on the herd near the eastern fence line, closest to the military base, where helicopters had been buzzing earlier, but had now gone quiet. That's when I saw it, a figure standing motionless, just beyond the barbed wire, about 50 yards out. At first I thought it might be a base guard, but something was different. The shape was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, and completely still. Not a twitch, no shifting weight, no sign of breathing, just standing nothing. Rufus growled low and pulled at the leash, trying to back away. When I squinted to get a better look, the figure seemed strange. Its edges were too smooth, almost like it was wrapped in some odd skin that didn't reflect moonlight right. It didn't look like any uniform or clothing I'd ever seen. Then, in a blink, it was gone. Not walked away, just vanished as if someone had erased it from existence. My heart raced, and Rufus barked sharply. I spent the next hour searching with flashlights, but found nothing. The sand was untouched, with only our own tracks visible. Something changed after that night. The cattle started acting weird. Normally calm at dusk, they'd become skittish, constantly looking toward the fence line and jumping at the slightest sound. A few weeks later, I noticed several cattle were missing from different parts of the ranch. No tracks from predators, no signs of mountain lions or coyotes. They just disappeared. I worked security at the base near Groom Lake Area 51, as everyone calls it, for about 5 years. These weren't your typical daytime security shifts with friendly waves at tourists. Most nights were spent late, staring into the endless desert, watching for anything out of the ordinary. Standard protocol was straightforward. Keep an eye on the perimeter, check the fences, report any trespassers or wildlife. But something changed. The rules shifted subtly, without announcement. No radio broadcasts, no new bulletin board notices. Suddenly, our usual rounds transformed into orders to monitor the skies, with no further explanation. We called these the blackout shifts. Inside the compound, lights dimmed. Radios fell silent, except for hushed whispers. The constant mechanical hum that usually filled the air seemed to vanish. One particular night stands out. I was in the East Observation Tower, scanning the desert landscape. Animals started disappearing from nearby properties. The ground where livestock vanished showed no signs of struggle. No blood, no hair, no drag marks. I checked with neighbors, but no one else reported missing stock. The numbers didn't lie, and I couldn't shake the feeling something was wrong. Then one night, while walking the fence line with my dog Rufus, I heard that strange worrying noise again. Helicopters circled low overhead. Suddenly, one stopped directly above us, silent as a ghost. A flicker of light burst from the base, like a camera flash or distant spotlight. The helicopter seemed to shimmer, its edges bending like a heat haze or mirage. Rufus froze and whimpered. I wanted to move, but couldn't. The helicopter hung motionless for an eternity, before vanishing into the night sky without a sound or warning. Since then, everything changed. I watched the fence line closely. Nights feel longer, the desert colder, and quieter in an inexplicable way. I don't bring friends out here anymore. Rufus is never left alone. I've never reported this to authorities, unsure it would help or wanting to know more. But every night when the helicopters return and the fence line grows still, I feel watched. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there, just beyond reach, waiting. The desert night was cold and clear in early spring, stars blazing overhead, and the Milky Way stretching like a bright ribbon. During my night shift, the familiar sounds of the black desert landscape surrounded me, occasional coyote howls and distant plane engines. Then, everything changed. Without warning, Dozens of glowing orbs appeared in the sky, hovering silently. They moved with an impossible precision that defied explanation. Unlike any aircraft I'd encountered announced to me, these orbs shifted seamlessly between tight clusters and long lines, reminiscent of bird migration patterns, but completely silent and unnaturally smooth. Their most striking characteristic was how they bent light. When viewed directly, they shimmered like heat waves, but more solid and steady. They would flicker out and reappear slightly displaced, with no discernible physical mass yet an undeniable presence. I tried to call it in, but the communications were dead, just static and an eerie silence that seemed to envelop the entire base. For about 20 minutes, I watched these extraordinary objects drift toward the northwest horizon, eventually disappearing over the mountains. Using my binoculars and available radar systems, I found no trace of their presence. The next day, I reported the incident through official channels, receiving a standard response about unidentified aerial phenomena potentially related to classified aircraft testing. Other nights followed similar patterns. Sometimes the orbs returned, sometimes they didn't. Each encounter shared the same characteristics: light-bending phenomena and an unnatural silence. My teammates mostly dismissed or joked about these experiences, but I knew what I had witnessed. These weren't drones, flares, or any military craft I'd ever seen. They moved with a precision that suggested something almost alive, yet not quite living. Something fundamentally different from anything in my extensive military experience. After leaving the base, I continued scanning the night sky, half expecting their return. They never came back. But the memory of those inexplicable orbs remained, a persistent mystery that challenged everything I understood about flight and physics. When the desert night settles just right and everything goes completely still, something hangs in the air. Not something threatening, just watching. I'm not spinning tales about alien abductions or hidden government plots. These were simply nights spent staring into the vast, dark sky, sensing something others seemed to miss. My job at Area 51 lasted just over a year, primarily on the security team. Not exactly a position you chat about casually. I managed checkpoints, running biometric scans to ensure nobody entered without proper authorization. Those machines were supposed to be foolproof, but they weren't, not entirely. One particular checkpoint near the back gate led into a zone even fewer people knew about. The biometric scanners here were cutting edge: retina, fingerprint, voice recognition, plus some proprietary technology I never fully comprehended. Higher-ups claimed it was state-of-the-art. Yet sometimes the scans malfunctioned in peculiar ways. The system wouldn't just show typical errors. Instead, sensors would glitch, refusing to capture data. Machines would freeze momentarily, then reject individuals standing right there. Occasionally, they'd do something truly strange, rejecting people with valid clearances while accepting unauthorized personnel. These glitches made you want to walk away and never look back. That checkpoint always felt different, not in a supernatural sense, but distinctly off. Cameras would capture odd shadows, and sensors would detect unexplained electromagnetic interference. We were instructed to report such incidents without speculation. One particular night, during a late shift, everything seemed unusual. The base was unusually quiet. Most staff were either off-duty or working inside. The desert wind whispered softly, and a low moon cast pale light across the tarmac. The sky was cloudless, stars scattered like pinpricks overhead. Around 2:30 a.m., an alarm suddenly beeped on my console. A biometric scan had cleared someone at the back gate checkpoint, except this person didn't exist in any system. No clearance, no ID badge, no record. This simply didn't happen. The screen displayed an approaching figure, and initially, I assumed it was either a prank or another system glitch. The gate had opened after the scanners accepted the person, but something felt off from the start. I reached for my radio to report, only to have the comms crackle and cut out briefly. On the screen, the figure moved with an unnatural smoothness, almost gliding. They wore a dark uniform, but the most unsettling detail was their face, or rather, the complete lack of one. It wasn't a camera issue or poor image quality. The cameras showed a perfect outline of a head and shoulders, yet no features were visible. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just a blank space where a face should be. I tried every possible angle, zooming in and scanning adjacent camera feeds. Nothing. The person seemed to have materialized just for the scan, then vanished without a trace. The system logs were equally mysterious. No ID number, no access permissions. This person simply did not exist in any database. For a few minutes, I convinced myself it was a technical glitch, maybe a corrupted data stream or camera malfunction. But then the back gate camera feed went completely static for about 10 seconds before rebooting to normal. The figure was gone. No evidence remained. When I tried to radio the control tower, I got only static. Something compelled me to walk toward the checkpoint, a chill running down my spine. Outside, the desert was silent except for distant generator hums. My flashlight revealed nothing unusual, no footprints, no disturbed dust. The next day, things got even stranger. When I asked about the incident, my colleagues acted like it never happened. The footage had vanished from the archives. No record existed of the mysterious figure or the camera glitch. In the following days, the biometric scanners at the back gate continued to behave erratically. They'd reject authorized personnel randomly, or lock up completely. Higher-ups started rerouting traffic away from the checkpoint, as if trying to erase the entire incident. I quit not long after. The whole experience left me deeply unsettled in a way I couldn't explain. Whatever had happened that night, it wasn't a normal malfunction. It was something else entirely. Something that would continue to haunt the back of my mind. The Nevada desert can hide secrets beyond imagination, and sometimes curiosity leads you to encounters that defy explanation. That's how I found myself near Area 51. Not by design, but through a mix of bad timing and restless wandering. I was camping with Rusty, my scrappy little mutt who always seems to be trying to talk through his weird bark. Late summer was settling in, and the sky was darkening as dusk approached. We were hiking along a rough trail near the edges of Groom Lake, with giant fences barely visible in the distance. I'd seen videos of people getting close to this mysterious base and wanted to understand the intrigue. Rusty was sniffing around while I walked, barely paying attention to my surroundings. Suddenly, an eerie feeling washed over me, the sense that I wasn't alone. The desert was silent except for the wind rustling through sparse brush. Then, without a sound, a black pickup materialized on the dirt road just feet away. No engine noise, no tire sounds. It was as if the vehicle simply appeared out of nowhere. As the driver's window slowly slid down, I looked up and saw something extraordinary. The man's eyes caught the dim light in an unnatural way. It glowed with a pale, subtle light. Not a reflection, but an internal luminescence that was both creepy and mesmerizing. His gaze was intense, penetrating, as if he could read my entire being in an instant. Rusty sensed something was wrong, growling low with raised hackles, but the driver remained completely still. After what seemed like an eternity, but was probably just seconds, the window rolled back up. The truck disappeared down the dirt path, silent and without headlights, vanishing into the night as quickly as it had appeared. The desert returned to its quiet state, with only Rusty's breathing and distant cicada hums breaking the silence. I didn't wait around to see if they would return. Quickly gathering my things, I headed back to my campsite, constantly looking over my shoulder, knowing I'd witnessed something I couldn't explain. You think you know everything about your surroundings, only to realize there are mysteries that defy understanding. Moments that challenge everything you believe you know. I worked at Area 51 for a few years, but not in the roles most people imagine. My job was maintenance, deep underground in tunnels that felt more like a secret than a workspace. These weren't just utility passages, they were something else entirely. The tunnels were strange. Cold and dry, even when desert heat blazed outside. The walls weren't standard concrete, but unnaturally smooth surfaces covered in bizarre geometric symbols. Lines, triangles, and circles arranged in patterns that made no sense. What was truly unnerving was how these shapes glowed, a soft, pulsing blue light that barely illuminated the space. When I asked about the symbols, supervisors would shut down the conversation immediately. We were explicitly told not to discuss them. The whole facility had a secretive atmosphere. But these tunnels felt different, like they were guarding some profound, unspoken truth. My shifts were usually quiet, just me, a mop, a flashlight, moving through those eerie spaces. But sometimes, something else moved with me. Shadows at the edge of my vision, fleeting shapes that didn't belong. I'd turn quickly, but nothing was ever there. Just a hint of movement too fast to be human. Once, I could have sworn I saw a tall, thin figure pause behind a corner before vanishing completely. Those moments made me realize something was happening in those tunnels that couldn't be explained. That experience connected to another strange encounter later. I saw something by a truck, a figure with an unnatural presence. The way it moved, the silence, the strange glow in its eyes, none of it made sense. When I told friends, they dismissed it as a trick of light or someone wearing unusual contacts. My dog Rusty seemed to sense something too. Since that night, he's been nervous, especially in open spaces after dark. I'm convinced I wasn't in control during that encounter, though I can't explain exactly what happened. When I worked in those tunnels, something felt off from the start. I told Jonas, another maintenance guy, about it. He'd noticed the same thing, but nobody wanted to talk about it openly. He suggested it might be staff from higher up or something else entirely. One night during a late shift, the base was nearly empty, and the tunnels seemed darker than usual. Some auxiliary lights were down for maintenance. I was working in a deeper section, where the walls narrowed and strange symbols glowed brightly. As I leaned against the wall taking a break, I heard a faint, scratching sound from the shadows ahead. I called out, but got no response. My flashlight beam just bounced off the walls when I tried to illuminate the area. The scratching stopped briefly, then resumed even softer, almost like something was moving behind the wall. Suddenly, the tunnel light flickered and died completely, leaving me in total darkness with only the faint symbol glow. I dropped my flashlight, and the noise stopped immediately. Trying to stay calm, I reached for my phone, but it was dead. No signal, which wasn't surprising underground. After what seemed like an eternity, the tunnel lights clicked back on. I was alone, with no trace of whatever had made those sounds. I left early that night. When I told my boss about the power outage, he brushed it off as a routine glitch. But something wasn't right. I discovered all security footage from that night had vanished. Not corrupted, just completely gone. Like someone, or something, had deliberately deleted it. After a few more strange incidents, I quit. The shadowy movements, those glowing symbols, the sense of silent watchers. It was too much. I never shared the full story, because I knew how crazy it would sound. But those tunnels were real, and whatever was moving in the darkness, I'm certain it wasn't human. I hadn't planned on getting near Area 51. It was more accidental. Just dumb curiosity and bad luck. I'd been camping in the Nevada desert for a few days, trying to escape everything. My dog Rusty was with me, a scrappy little mutt full of energy, with a bark that always sounded like he was trying to communicate something unusual. The desert was quiet, just the wind rustling through sparse brush. I was hiking along a rough trail near the edges of Groom Lake, with nothing marking the boundary except distant giant fences. Rusty, my dog, was sniffing around while I walked, thinking about those videos I'd seen of people getting close to this secret base. Suddenly, I got this prickling feeling that I wasn't alone. Without any warning sound, an unmarked black pickup appeared on the dirt road just feet away. I swear it was like the truck materialized out of thin air. No engine noise, no tire sounds, nothing. When the driver's window rolled down, I looked up and saw something bizarre. The man's eyes caught the dim light differently. They glowed with a pale, eerie light. Not a reflection, but an internal glow that was subtle yet unmistakable. Creepy, but not glaring. He stared directly at me, not saying a word, looking right through me as if reading every thought. Rusty started growling low, his hackles raised, but the driver didn't react. After what felt like an eternity but was probably just seconds, he rolled the window back up, and the truck disappeared silently down the dirt path, blending into the night. No headlights, no noise, just gone. I didn't stick around to see if they'd return. I hurried back to my campsite, constantly checking over my shoulder. The encounter haunted me. Had I been watched for hours, maybe days? This was the first time I'd seen anyone face to face in such a strange way. Back home, I shared the story with friends, but they laughed it off. They suggested it was a trick of light or someone wearing unusual contact lenses. But something didn't add up. The way he moved, the unnatural silence, those glowing eyes. It was far from normal, and no matter how much I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had happened that night in the desert. Night falls differently at the cafeteria now. Something shifted after that table incident with the mysterious handprints. What started as a strange morning with a sliding tray became a series of unsettling moments that changed everything. The first time it happened, I was flipping omelets during my morning shift when the tray behind me clattered, then slid back onto the counter, perfectly clean, untouched. Breakfast, burritos, fruit, and coffee remained exactly as they were. I called out, expecting a response. Silence answered me. A faint metallic smell hung in the air, like the taste of a coin. Over the next week, it repeated 4 times. Trays returned without a trace, that cold metallic scent always lingering. Some moments, I could almost convince myself it was just a mistake, a misheard buzzer or misread order ticket. But then came the table. While wiping down the long cafeteria table near the huge windows overlooking Groom Lake, I spotted 3 dark, hand-like scorch marks. Each patch was the size of a grown man's palm, pressed into the formica surface. No burns marked the floor or ceiling, just these smooth, scorched impressions on the tabletop. My heart raced. I radioed maintenance, who arrived, poked around, and dismissed it as a chemical spill after testing the surface with a green lighting gadget. They lobbed it as a cleaning issue, ignoring the handprints entirely. By evening, a supervisor had the marks wiped clean and repainted so quickly, I couldn't even note the paint color. Something changed after that moment. The entire kitchen atmosphere shifted. Chef Tony stopped his constant opera humming. Lynn, the dishwasher, became jumpy when taking out garbage. Mara, the new sous chef, stared at the door like she expected an unexpected intrusion. I overheard whispers in the pantry, rapid, hushed voices. But when I cracked the door, only silence greeted me. Just the walk-in cooler's hum and distant plate clanging echoed through the empty space. Rusty, my dog, has been skittish ever since that night, especially around open spaces after dark. I'm not sure what exactly happened, but one thing is certain. I wasn't in control that evening. I walked back to the walk-in freezer, hallway lights flickering, and the freezer door groaning. Trying to calm myself, I flicked on the flashlight and muttered, "Greg, you still jump at shadows." As I reached for the handle, my breath fogging the light beam, I stopped cold. 2 handprints marked the floor, smaller ones, like a child's palms pressed into the vinyl tile. No scorch marks anywhere else, just these strange imprints. My phone's flash lit the dark corridor briefly, but the photo showed nothing unusual. I left the walk-in door open, watching the hallway until my cart clattered into the kitchen. I texted Tony about the weird footprints. No response. By morning, the freezers were unplugged for maintenance, and the hallway sealed off. Nobody said a word. The supervisor mentioned only electrical oddities and vague precautions. Staff started disappearing. The lunch roster emptied by half. People called in sick or transferred out. Mara gave me a tight smile about a headache then vanished the next day. One afternoon, I delivered dinner trays to the North Tower. The door was slightly open, the room dark. I set down the trays and turned to leave. Suddenly, the lights flashed on. 6 empty chairs surrounded a metal table. The trays sat exactly where I'd left them. A thick, iron-like smell hung in the air. A soft click. The door swung shut. I stood listening to my own breathing before backing out, tripping over the threshold. The door locked silently behind me. No one in the hallway. My radio only produced static when I called for help. I pounded on the door until the supervisor responded. The lock clicked. The door opened inward. Empty. No trays, no marks, just a lingering smell on my clothes. That night I checked the daily logs. Every strange incident returned trays, handprints, power fluctuations, was logged as operator error. No one had reported the hallway marks or the locked door. I felt like I was going crazy. The night was thick with tension. I was locking up the pumps just after midnight when the door to the little store swung open. A man stood dripping wet, rain hammering the pavement outside. My border collie Java bristled, shooting out from behind the counter. He leaned against the windshield wiper fluid display, water streaming from his jacket. "My car stalled," he said, his voice rough. "Out past the hills near an old service road." I grabbed a towel and handed it over. Java whined, nosing at his boots. The man glanced down, managing a half smile. I poured black coffee with no sugar. Steam curled into the fluorescent light as he sipped. Then he spoke about a light hovering over the desert, yellow-green, just suspended above the wash. His engine died the moment he drove underneath it. He set the cup down, condensation dripping. I tried the radio. Static. My phone was dead. Outside, the storm rattled the corrugated awning. I studied him carefully, mud on his jeans, cuts on his knuckles. He seemed done talking, but I wanted to know more. I called the sheriff's office. The line crackled. "Traffic's rough," the dispatcher said. "Call back in the morning." Java kept nudging the man's leg. Finally, he muttered, "Thanks," and drifted back into the night without another word. Weeks earlier, another strange scene had unfolded. The kitchen felt massive, fluorescent lights blinding. My dog Bramble wouldn't enter, barking at darkened windows with nothing outside. I closed every blind, turned on all lights. Sleep came in fragments. I dreamt of the cafeteria, trays sliding off counters, handprints glowing everywhere. When I woke, my apron lay wet with sweat on the floor. By dawn, I'd resigned and left the base, Bramble trailing me down the gravel road. The cafeteria remained behind, pale and silent under the desert sky. I knew its smells and marks would persist long after my departure. The desert smelled like wet sage after the rain stopped that morning. Deep tire tracks led off the service road into the sandy landscape. Driving my old pickup, I followed their path with Java beside me, her ears back. A mile out, I found where the tracks ended abruptly at the edge of a broad, shallow wash. No skid marks, no signs of turning around, just tracks vanishing, as if the truck had disappeared. I swept my flashlight across the wash bed. Smooth sand, small stones, and a few lizard tracks were all that remained. Java's tail stood stiff, and an uneasy feeling crept over me. Glancing toward the horizon, I caught a fleeting glimpse of something curved, reflecting just above the distant hill. When I looked again, it was gone. Driving back to town, the service road seemed to stretch endlessly behind me. At the gas station, Java jumped down and investigated. Tire tracks leading to the pump island. They started as if the truck had driven straight off the lot, ending beneath the passenger door where Java now sat. Inside the station, I found the stranger's coffee cup still half full and lukewarm. Its grassy, sulphurous aroma lingered as I picked it up. Java growled softly behind me. I set the cup down, my mind replaying the night's events. The rain, the stranger's soaked jacket, the mysterious glow he'd described. That afternoon, I closed up early and headed home. Passing the sheriff's deputy, I asked about missing person reports. He shrugged. Desert folk come and go. No one's called it in. At home, I called Carrie to say I'd be late. Java perked up as I pulled into the driveway, the house filled with the warm scent of curry and onions. Something about those tracks, that vanishing truck, and the stranger's story continued to gnaw at me, a puzzle with no clear solution. I found myself in the kitchen with Carrie, a bowl of rice, and lentils in hand. Steam rose in the lamplight as I ate. Java sprawled at my feet, head resting on my boot. Through the window, an empty road wound toward distant hills, no lights or shadows breaking the desert night's hushed stillness. Later, I studied local maps, tracing the service road in the wash. I searched for any mention of strange lights or sudden engine failures. Only rumors emerged, whispers of ghost trucks and desert mirages dancing at the edges of reality. When bed finally claimed me, Java jumped up, tail thumping against the blankets. The lamp clicked off, and I stared at the ceiling. The man's wide, frantic eyes were playing in my mind. The tracks that simply stopped in the sand haunted my thoughts. No dreams came that night. Twice, Java's soft whimper pulled me from sleep. Each time, I glanced at the window, catching what seemed like a pale glow drifting across the yard. Just the street light shifting behind curtains, playing tricks. Morning brought a discovery. A single footprint pressed into the gravel by the gate, boot tread still holding damp mud. I checked Carrie's boots, clean. Stepping into the print, I felt its cool dampness. No rain had fallen overnight. Java and I circled the print like detectives, noting its direction, pointing toward the desert, toward those hills where my pickup had stalled. Inside, I washed up and poured coffee. The cup trembled in my hand. I renamed the service road on the map, the vanishing track. How that man faded into the night remained a mystery, but he'd left his mark everywhere. On the road, on the map, deep in my mind, something lingered out there where soft sand meets tire tracks and engines die. A light hovering just beyond the hills, waiting. The 2 lanes skirting Groom Lake stretched before us, windows down against the brutal desert heat. Our old Subaru Outback coughed on the final stretch. It was 11:47 p.m. when the headlights first flickered, dimming until the yellow line barely showed. I eased off the gas. You see that? Will's voice sounded distant, as if underwater. The headlights brightened, then went nearly dark again. The engine stalled, gauges dropping to 0. I gripped the steering wheel, fingers flexed. The desert swallowed our words as we peered out the window. The radio dial felt gummy and unresponsive, static, overwhelming any hint of sound. Earlier we'd been listening to old blues stations, but now even those were gone. Ledger, our lanky Whippet Greyhound mix, lay curled in his bed on the passenger seat. His ears flicked, and he looked up with wide eyes, head tilting as if hearing something I couldn't detect. I clicked off the headlights and let my eyes adjust to the darkness. Above the road, about 50 yards ahead, a soft white-green glow appeared. It reminded me of bioluminescent algae in a creek, but this light was steady and unblinking. Suspended as if by invisible wires, the orb hovered 20 feet above the asphalt. My throat went dry as the glow pulsed and brightened, casting long shadows beneath the car. Ledger stood, hackles raised, letting out a low whine. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood in the open driver's door. The orb dipped slightly, seeming to notice me. A vibration filled the air, just under my skin. It wasn't a sound, but a deep thrumming that made my teeth buzz. Crouching to Ledger's level, I patted his head. His fur prickled beneath my hand. Behind me, Will's phone flashlight shook, painting dust motes in its beam. The orb drifted closer, gliding without wind or movement. We froze, like animals caught in headlights. I thought about speeding away, but my legs wouldn't respond. The orb halted just beyond the car's grill, bright enough to blind me if I stared directly at it. Then it began moving slowly sideways, following the road's curve. Will gunned the engine. It roared to life, rattling the doors. I threw the car into drive, tires spinning on the gravel shoulder. The headlights flared fully, and we pulled onto the pavement. The orb remained beside us, gliding over the desert scrub at our 2-lane pace of about 40 miles per hour. Will gripped the wheel with one hand, the other on the gear shift, eyes wide. Ledger pressed flat against the seat. Occasionally, the radio would flicker to life with a distant AM talk show, before dissolving back into static. The mesa walls rose, framing the desert highway as we drove. An orb glided beneath a rocky outcrop, curving alongside us. Weeks had passed since any rain, and the air carried a faint scent of ozone and dust, reminiscent of a recent thunderstorm. I held my phone out the window, its screen catching the orb's glow. When I tapped record, the display went black. In that moment, I noticed the orb's underside, smooth and seamless, without a single panel or seam. It tilted slightly, catching the faint starlight. For 5 miles, we wound along the highway past scrub and bluffs. The orb remained silent, its light pulsing once every second, like a slow metronome. Then, on a straight stretch, it began to rise, not with a dramatic streak or roar, but slowly and deliberately. We watched as it climbed above the mesa rim, becoming a pale dot against the starfield, before shooting straight up and fading into nothing. Headlights illuminated the empty desert. The car fell silent, engine droning, radio dead, dial stuck. I flicked the overhead light, which blinked once and stayed dark. We coasted to a stop past a cattle guard, its bars clinking beneath our tires. Will killed the engine. Ledger, looking exhausted, hopped down from the seat and shook like he'd just run a marathon. I opened the door to absolute stillness. Not a breeze stirred, a waning moon hovered above the mesa, and the highway stretched empty in both directions. We got back in the car. Will coaxed Ledger onto the back seat. I pulled onto the road and drove away, silently, near Rachel's lights. Everything returned to normal. The radio worked, headlights functioned. But Ledger seemed reluctant to look in the rearview mirror. Now, whenever I drive that stretch, I catch myself glancing up, half expecting a pale glow drifting silently alongside me, through the desert night. We were a half-mile up the old mining trail when devices began to malfunction. My phone chirped with a device alert. GPS signal lost. Mia swore and tapped her wrist unit. Zach pulled out his tablet. All 3 screens blinked simultaneously. No signal. Our route cut straight through the fenced-off Area 51 boundary. I dismissed the issue, assuming the canyon walls were disrupting reception. The sun was sinking behind the peaks. As twilight settled over the salt flats, the sky painted itself in deep oranges and purples. We had been hiking all afternoon, our border collie mix, Bramble, leading the way with her keen nose. She darted between rocks and shrubs, always eager for the next interesting scent. The trail tightened at a sharp turn, where a single juniper tree clung desperately to the cliffside. Wind rattled dead branches overhead while I checked my phone. No GPS signal. Just this strange white line cutting across the desert core. Zach zoomed in on the map. "That's weird," he muttered. The route was an impossibly straight line, as if drawn freehand, pointing deep into the restricted base area. Mia tapped her hiking pole nervously. "Batteries are..." We tried to shrug it off, but an uneasiness lingered. The moon rose as a bright sliver behind the mesa, and we settled on a flat rock to share water and granola bars. Bramble hovered nearby, tail wagging, hoping for leftovers. At 8:37 p.m., something changed. The GPS apps flickered, and all 3 devices switched to an alternate route screen. The white line now cut diagonally across the fenced-off zone. Mia shivered. She'd stopped taking her medication for this trip, which always amplified her anxiety. Suddenly, a deep vibration rumbled beneath our feet. It felt like a distant truck, but stronger, almost rolling us from side to side. Zach's knuckles were white on his tablet. "Did you feel it?" He nodded. "But there's no road out there." Bramble's reaction told us something was wrong. She dropped from the ledge, hackles raised, a low whine catching in her throat. Then, as quickly as it started, the vibration stopped. The desert fell silent. Zach suggested we head back. We gathered our gear and retraced our steps, flashlights sweeping the path. An odd, breathless feeling settled over me. Bramble stayed close. Halfway down, moonlight broke through a thin cloud layer. That's when I saw it. Just a fleeting shadow near the tree line, maybe 30 yards off the trail. A silhouette so vague it could have been a trick of moonlight, but distinct enough to make my skin crawl. The desert silence shattered when my phone buzzed. A silhouette glowed green, eyes low and unblinking. I froze, mouth going dry. Mia gripped my arm. Before I could react, the figure snapped backward into darkness. My flashlight swept the spot, nothing but sagebrush swaying in the breeze. Our devices lit up simultaneously with a trail map that had transformed. The restricted zone vanished, as if it never existed. Zach exhaled hard. This is nuts. We moved swiftly but carefully, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. Bramble padded beside me, occasionally barking a single sharp note, before going silent, tail low. Phantom sounds followed. A toe dragging in sand, a soft stone brush. Each time I'd spin around, finding nothing. At the switchback, strange footprints emerged. Oval shapes pressed lightly into dirt, larger than our boots but no deeper than animal tracks. No claw marks. No displaced earth. They pointed up the mountain, then stopped abruptly at the trail's edge. Mia knelt down, examining them closely. I joined her, my light scanning the wash below. Tumbleweeds scattered around an ancient mortar stone, where miners once worked, silver veins. The prints didn't lead toward the trail crest. Instead, they pointed into the darkness behind us. Mia swallowed. Let's go. We quickened our pace. My boots crunched loose rock. Bramble ran ahead, then would pause, head tilted, ears twitching. I murmured, "We're almost there." A mile later, we crested the final ridge. Moonlight transformed the wash road into a silver ribbon leading to our cars. Brief relief washed over us. Then my phone buzzed again. The map now showed 2 routes, the wash road and a thin white line cutting directly toward the base gate. Are you kidding me? I hurled the phone into the dirt. We didn't stop. Bramble raced ahead, barking once at the cars. My hands shook while fumbling for keys. The engine sputtered, then roared. Gravel crunched beneath our tires. Light beams swept the desert. In the rearview mirror, only darkness and rising dust followed our escape. I downloaded the trail data at home, and the GPS tracks looked clean, following the official trail perfectly, with no glitches or impossible shortcuts, just a consistent elevation change every half mile. As I went to delete the event from my log, I noticed one more track entry. It was time-stamped at 8:45 p.m., with coordinates deep inside the base perimeter, exactly where those glowing eyes had flickered. I highlighted the row and pressed delete. My computer peeped and shut down. My phone died, and from my window, I caught a low, distant hum. It was like sand shifting beneath steel, lasting just a moment before the night swallowed it again. The radar bunker was silent during the graveyard shift. It was 3 a.m., and the cold, still desert stretched outside. My German shepherd, Hoshi, was curled under the console, my only companion. She'd been restless when I tried to put her in the kennel, so I'd left a tilted chair for her to doze beneath. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A perfect circle appeared, glowing soft gray against the black background. Too round to be a storm cell or a flock of birds. It zipped in from the south, paused for exactly 2 seconds, then shot east at a speed that would destroy any known aircraft. The blip was tiny, just 3 pixels, but unmistakable. I keyed the mic. "Control, we've got an unidentified blip." A crackle, then silence. My radio was dead. I toggled panels, no interference lights, no alarms. Everything looked normal. "Pashi, you seeing this?" She lifted her head, ears forward, then lay back down. The pulse return was clean, a perfect echo with no trail, no debris field. As I tried to plot a course, data lines went dead. The blip vanished from the screen, only to reappear on the west edge moments later. Same pattern. For the next hour, I tracked 6 more identical circles, each darting in, pausing, then racing off. No altitude data, no radar signature, just a single dot. My heartbeat sank low in my chest. At 4 a.m., the supervisor's voice crackled over the intercom. "Tech Larkin, step into my office." Now. I closed the feed and walked down the corridor, Hoshi padding at my heels. The hall lights were dimmed for energy savings, though we'd never had a need before. The first sign something was wrong came during a blackout. Footsteps and Hoshi's nails echoed on the metal grate as we approached Colonel Reeves's office, its door slightly open. Inside, the colonel sat behind his desk, hands steepled, alone. His gaze locked onto mine with intense clarity. His instructions were direct. Report only instrument readings. Never trust what your eyes tell you. My throat tightened. "Yes, sir." When I insisted the instruments showed exactly what I reported, he leaned forward. His message was clear. If instruments fail to show something, do not mention it. I nodded in agreement. He tapped a folder, log it as false returns. The conversation was over. Back at the console, I hesitated before entering the false returns code. Hoshi whined, and I scratched her head. Weird occurrences became routine over the next few weeks. Circle blips appeared at 2 and 5 a.m., always logged under false returns. My coworkers exchanged strange looks. Whispers about ghost radar circulated. But no one pressed for details. One night, Hoshi became restless. She paced, ears alert, a low growl rumbling in her throat. The bunker's hum felt hollow, like an empty drum. Suddenly, the screen flickered. A circle appeared and remained, hovering silently at the display's center for almost 5 minutes. As I reached to key the mic, the radio crackled to life. A synthetic voice cut through the static. Object confirmed. Hoshi stiffened, hackles raised. Before I could respond, the screen went dark. I slammed keys, but all panels powered down. Emergency lights bathed the bunker in red. Hoshi barked sharply. "What the hell?" I whispered. 15 minutes later, the tech crew arrived. All systems were online. Logs showed no anomalies, no power glitches. Every console reading appeared normal. The circle vanished from any record. They found me under the console, Hoshi nudging my hand. The crew chief asked if I was okay. I forced just a power hiccup, I said. He frowned but dismissed me. I went home early. Hoshi slept at my feet while I stared out the living room window at the blindingly bright desert. I waited for shadows to move. During the next shift, I spotted it again. One perfect circle, moving faster and further. I felt sick. Hoshi refused to enter the bunker, pressing against the door and whining. The maintenance bay was quiet, just me and my flashlight, amid the usual HVAC rumble. Around 1:15 a.m., the hum suddenly cut out. An eerie silence descended. Like someone had pressed mute, a chill crept under my collar, making my palms sweat, not from the freezer's blast, but something else. I flicked on the overhead lights. They buzzed briefly before glowing normally. A tripped breaker, I thought. My dog Pippa, a skinny Australian cattle dog mix I'd smuggled in, lifted her head from her bed and growled low. She'd been with me every night shift for months, but never like this. Crouching by the console, I checked the gauges. Pressure levels, coolant temperatures, airflow rates, all normal, yet the silence persisted. I tapped my shoulder mic. Central responded with nothing but static. Pippa stood and walked to the window overlooking the yard. I followed her gaze. Days earlier, my supervisor had called me in. He told me to classify something as static, mentioning he'd seen planes in the air that didn't register on radar. "You're not aircraft tech," he'd said, "so mark it down." I complied, logging the mysterious circles as static. That night at home, I set my alarm for 2 a.m. Hoshi stirred beside me when it rang. Looking out the window revealed only bright stars, no movement. The next day's log showed 3 more perfect, silent circles darting in and out. Each started near a distant mesa, paused near our bunker, then raced away. Now I watch the skies more than my screen. Those circles might be out there, tracing invisible paths, waiting to reveal themselves. Hoshi sits by the door, ears up, ready to warn me when they return. The bay outside my window was eerily still. No wind stirred the desert grasses. When I looked closer, everything seemed slightly off. Shadows sharper, edges too precise. Something moved from the far side, an angular shape barely shoulder height, sliding past with impossible smoothness. Its edges were jagged, cutting through light in a way that bent and curved shadows around corners. Just a blink, and it vanished. Pippa's bark broke the silence. She bolted to my side, tail rigid. I backed from the glass, trying to turn on my phone, but the screen remained black. I grabbed the walkie-talkie. "Maintenance here," I whispered. Systems silent. Something just moved outside. Seconds ticked by before static crackled back. No response. I checked the door. Locked from the inside, as always. My flashlight beam swept the area as I pulled my jacket tighter. Pippa whined softly, following close. The hallway's fluorescent lights flickered 3 times before steadying. I closed my eyes, counting to 10. When I looked again, everything appeared normal. Maintenance schedules and safety posters lined the walls. But something felt deeply wrong. Pippa trembled. Her hackles raised. I knelt and scratched her ears. "Let's get out of here." Halfway there, I paused by the server room. The usual constant hum of fans was absent. Complete silence. I cracked the door open. Red and fat lights blinked across the racks, emergency LEDs casting a dull orange glow. My reflection stared back from the black glass cabinets, wide-eyed, sweat-matted hair. Then the door clicked shut behind me. I spun around. No breeze, just a soft metallic thunk. The handle wouldn't budge. "Pippa," I said quietly. She skidded to the door, scratching frantically. I kicked, but struck solid steel. Phone dead. Walkie-talkie crackling. I pressed the button. Static flared into a high-pitched whistle, then cut out completely. My forehead pressed against the cool metal door. The low hum had died 12 minutes ago, but time felt stretched. My phone buzzed on the stairwell landing. 2 missed calls from Sophia. When she called again, I answered quickly. "Everything okay?" she asked. My response came out sharper than intended. "I'm fine," I said, rubbing my neck. Her concern was clear. "You sound weird. You sure you're alone?" The conversation ended abruptly. Pippa was with me, her warm nose pressed against my knuckles. The lights had steadied after flickering wildly. We moved down the stairs, her steps clicking behind me as I carried her through the main lobby. Security cameras watched silently from the walls, their monitors showing empty hallways and closed bay doors. My badge wouldn't work at the exit. I swiped faster, harder, frustration mounting. Then a dark shape caught my eye, darting across one of the screens. I punched the release button, and the door clicked open. Pippa rushed out ahead of me into the cool night air. Outside, the desert was silent. The moon hid behind clouds, casting everything in gray. I walked the perimeter fence, searching for any sign of disturbance. Nothing. Back at my truck, I loaded Pippa into the passenger seat and sat with the door open, staring at the base entrance. Floodlights cut through the darkness until they blended with the clouds. Later that night at home, sleep eluded me. I listened for the hum, watching Pippa twitch at the foot of the bed. My mind kept returning to that shapeless, angular form bending light as it slipped past the window. Would I hear that vibration again? Would I ever walk into that bay and feel the air pulse beneath my skin? A dull thump against the tent jolted me awake. My watch read 2:13 a.m., though it felt much later. I stepped onto the coarse sand, my skinny border collie Ranger already alert at the camp's edge. His nose quivered toward a rock face about 30 yards away, and a single sharp bark cut through the cold desert air. I clicked on my headlamp and followed his gaze. Out here past Groom Lake, the night held a dry chill unique to this landscape. Ranger pawed at a boulder, looking up at me. When I aimed my light, a soft blue glow pulsed against the rock's striations, fading and brightening in what seemed to match my own heartbeat. My heart thumped as I moved closer. The light's rhythm was steady, slow, deliberate. I tapped my chest, the pulses aligned perfectly. Lifting my camera to record, only static filled the lens. I shook the device, but the display blinked and went dark. After 5 blinks, the glow vanished. Darkness reclaimed the rocks. Ranger nudged my boot, winded. My watch read 4:47 a.m., 2 hours and 34 minutes completely unaccounted for. My head spun. "You feel that?" I whispered, shaking Ranger's collar. His ears perked, and he circled me restlessly. Fragments of memory surfaced. Falling asleep around midnight, no wind, then waking disoriented. The camp looked undisturbed. My stove still warm, a ghostly flame flickering, water bottle exactly as I'd left it. Inside the tent, I pulled the memory card, hoping for answers. My laptop showed empty folders, no record of the night's events. Frustration mounted as I zipped the tent closed. Ranger settled nearby, ears flat, watching me intently. As sunrise crept over the mesa rim, first light revealed something chilling. Fresh footprints in the sand. Mine and Ranger's were expected, but a third set, larger, deeper, led directly toward the restricted fence. I followed the prints a few yards. They stopped abruptly at the barbed wire. No gate, no break. A wind gust stirred tumbleweeds, spinning trash in their wake. Hands shaking, I packed up quickly. Something had happened, something I couldn't explain. I loaded everything onto my pack frame, with Ranger perched on my shoulders, getting a better view. At my truck, the dash clock blinked like it had lost power. I checked the headlights. They worked fine. The engine roared to life as I turned the key. Driving back along Desert Highway, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The base fence looked unchanged. Towers spaced evenly, floodlights dormant in daylight. No trucks, no activity anywhere. My first stop was Rachel's gas station, my legs shaking as I climbed out. Ranger nosed the glass door while I spoke with the clerk. She seemed curious about my early start. Over coffee, I scrolled through my camera's menu, battery at 70%, but no recordings. The date and time were correct, just the footage vanished. I reviewed yesterday's still images. Campfire, dinner plate, Ranger drinking water. No trace of that pulsing glow. The desert rolled past, mountains on the horizon as I drove home. Sleep came difficult that night. Every time I closed my eyes, a pale light flickered against my eyelids, counting minutes I couldn't remember living. Dawn broke with Ranger tugging me awake, whining softly. At the window, the mesa looked the same. Soft heat waves breathed across the desert, but something felt different. I'd walked through a door I couldn't find again. I left the camera on the desk, lens caps sealed. Ranger settled by the door, ears twitching at each wind-rattled screen. Staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd blink and miss it again. Those mysterious pulses, the erased hours, footprints that seemed to walk themselves to the base's edge and back. 10 minutes into my dusk patrol, it was just me, the old Cessna 172, and the faint engine drone when everything changed. ATC went dead silent. I keyed the mic on the Indian Springs Tower frequency. Only static hissed back. The GPS backup showed no signal, and suddenly the radar scope flashed an unexpected blip, an unassigned transponder code, 81820 Alpha. I tapped the identify button. Nothing responded. The speed read 2100 knots. No jet engine roar, no sonic boom. just my prop wash, and it was headed directly toward Groom Lake at 25,000 feet. I was flying a routine patrol when things got strange. Something appeared on my scope, a blip keeping perfect formation just off my left wing tip, 50 miles out, but tracking me with eerie precision. My stomach knotted. I tried calling the tower on guard channel. Silence. Nothing. The desert below was bathed in pink light from the sinking sun, with scattered messes standing like silent guardians. My oil temperature climbed slightly, unusual for a short 20-minute flight. Angling over the dry lake bed, I scanned the sky. No contrails, no navigation lights. Just clean, empty air. Then an officer's voice finally crackled through. "You're not clear to identify that target. Maintain heading and altitude. Do not deviate." I acknowledged, but my fingers tingled on the yoke, leveled off at 5,000 feet, fighting the urge to bank. White salt flats glowed beneath me as the horizon flared orange. Suddenly, the ghost plane on my scope flickered and vanished. No warning. One moment present, the next, nothing. Just blank radar with no weather returns. I slowed, cockpit lights dimmed, peering out. The sky was utterly empty. Turning back toward Indian Springs, I noticed something below. A row of military trucks rolled across the desert road, sealing off a highway section. Black tarp-covered crates, men in dark uniforms unloading into shallow trenches, searchlights cutting through dust, never looking up. My engine sputtered briefly, as if the air itself had changed. Then power stabilized. I climbed back to 6,000 feet, watching the trucks shrink to brown dots in my wing mirror. Another radio transmission. Clear the frequency. Then silence. I landed at the airfield, runway lights blazing, blood still pumping from the inexplicable encounter. In the secluded hangar, my heart raced as I questioned the mechanic about the highway barricade. His response was dismissive. Base ops gave no explanation, only mentioning it was sealed for scheduled maintenance. I stepped out into the desert, a cool breeze brushing against my skin. My shadows stretched across the tarmac as I scanned the horizon toward Groom Lake. Nothing seemed out of place, except the lingering memory of that mysterious blip. Later that night, I brewed coffee on the patio with Huckleberry, my big yellow lab whose snoring could rival a tractor's rumble. He nudged my boot while I gazed skyward. The stars remained unchanged, pinpricks of light, offering no hint of the day's earlier strangeness. I reviewed my flight log meticulously. No errors, no unusual notes about ghost targets, just standard entries of time, altitude, and fuel consumption. The radar recording was completely blank, as if wiped clean. After letting Huckleberry inside and securing the door, I turned to my radio scanner. Static crackled across every channel. One final cup of coffee in hand, I stepped onto the porch. The desert lay silent and empty around me. As I went to bed, I strained to hear the mysterious hum that had vanished, wondering if I'd ever encounter that unexplained phenomenon again. I apologize, but it seems like the text you intended to share is incomplete or was not fully pasted. Could you provide the full original text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete context, I cannot effectively restructure the paragraph.